Welcome, guys and ghouls. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. I'm so glad you guys could join us tonight. You could be hanging out, doing something other than watching Netflix or the boob tube. If you're listening right now, you're listening on one of our many outlets. You could be listening on Spreaker. We're also on Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Tumblr, YouTube, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, and we're also on kpnl-db.com. So tonight we were supposed to have Roots and Wings Paranormal on, but unfortunately, I think it was after a get-together or gathering or something they did. They're not feeling well, so we're going to reschedule for a later date. So tonight, I'm going to talk about a few things. Also, I want to read from this book, Ghost Tracks, Haunting Tales Along the Rails by Elizabeth A. Green and Susie Garrison Meyer. Also, we will be taking calls. So if you would like to call in with any paranormal things that have been happening in your house, any sightings you might have had, UFO, cryptid, whatnot, or just need to talk to somebody, feel free to give me a call at 1-970-335-9596. That's 1-970-335-9596. So yesterday was quite interesting as Friday night, I went over to my sister's house. She's moving out of this house that she's lived in for the past year. And from the get-go, she was telling me basically how very active this place was. And so before she left, she wanted to check it out. And she also wanted me to check out this spot up at the homeless camp here in Durango, Colorado. So we started off at her house. And I know I talked a little bit about this last night, but didn't really get to touch on everything. Basically, I believe we started in her living room, and we were using the FLIR camera as well as an SLS camera, and right away picked up on a guy, basically. That's what I picked up on, basically, after talking to him and whatnot for a while. This is a man, I believe he was disabled during his life, and for some apparent reason was still disabled in his afterlife. So yeah, he's just sitting there, moving his legs around with his arms, and all relaxed, sitting back on this propane bottle, and then starts scooting himself forward and like moving his legs with his arms and such. And we did, try some debunking and stuff. Let's move this tank over here, see if he shows up over there in this area. He ended up, after that, about, let's say 5 feet away, there's a dining room area to the left, and then to the right, there's a hallway that has a back door, then, the washer and dryer, bathroom, closet, and then another room, which is her son's room. So there at the bookshelf, there's an entity or ghost standing there, leaning up on the bookshelf with his cool guy pose, looks all nice, relaxed, has his one leg crossed over the other, and then all of a sudden the sitting ghost that can't stand but will sit in random places is sitting next to him on a box. So we sat there and talked to them for a while and then petered on down the hallway. And as we're going down the hallway, you hit this one point where it definitely feels like there's a vortex or a portal or, there's definitely something weird going on in this area. It makes you feel dizzy, lightheaded, whatnot. I did not mention this to my 2 daughters and my sister as we're walking through, but made a note of it. Went into her son's room, and there, sitting against his clothes basket, is the same guy that had been sitting in the other room. He wasn't afraid of us. He kept showing up. Then I turned to try to get different parts of the room. My sister's like, hey, go over there where the hot water heater is and see if anything pops up over there. That area really creeps me out. So I pointed over there, and it's weird because generally the lasers will show you orange, red, blue, white, whatever's coming through. It was basically all white, not picking anything up, and I'm like, okay, what's wrong with this thing? The batteries are full. Is this paratechnical issues? What's going on? So I turn and point it at my daughters so I can get a human figure or stick figure on there. And then as I'm turning back to where the water closet is, what looked like my oldest daughter's stick figure went with the camera and the Kinect, basically, up over into that corner. And then at that point, it looked like one of those, I don't know if it's like The Exorcist or whatnot, where there's the creepy thing in the corner and its arms are all backwards and legs are all kind of backwards, huddled up in the corner of the room. So that was kind of creepy, but I wrote it off as this could be a glitch, like could be something going on with the SLS. So we go back out and check again at the bookshelf, and there he is still just chilling out. Pretty sure the guy chilling out on the bookshelf, due to his height and such, he was a pretty short guy, was her boyfriend that was stabbed to death, basically. And his name was Fabian. Which, we all knew from the get-go, after he passed, that he was with Sarah. Not only because he loved her, but come to find out about 2 weeks after he passed, she was pregnant with his son, which she in turn named Fabian. Then we go on and use different means. We use the Ghost Radar app. We use the Ghost Radio. What is the other one we used that was on the cell phone? We basically used an SPB7 for a while and had some stuff coming through, and then we used the paranormal puck, and that was pretty odd. At this point, we have the SLS camera sitting beside me on the bed, pointing towards the end of the bed and the entryway and such, and this guy comes and shows up at the end of the bed with one knee kicked up and just sitting there basically the whole time. We have things coming through the ghost box, and then started to use the paranormal puck because my spirit portal hadn't arrived yet, and just the of the radio and all the other things that come through it, it's kind of difficult to focus on words, and it can actually cause headaches and other things like that to go on. So we're using the paranormal puck, and we got all kinds of different things going on in there. We have a name pop up that is relative to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. There's something gonna happen in March, basically, is what it was saying. February is gonna be really cold, really bad. I don't know, just for us or other places. And then in March, something's supposed to go down. Sounds like basically the end of the world, and military, government, etc., etc. Then we part ways. My daughters go back home because my sister's like, hey, you got to go with me up to this camp because I have this night vision scope and a FLIR camera and also night vision cameras. And so it had been snowing this evening. We go down there. It actually quit snowing, but it was still cloudy. So we were expecting more snow, but it did end up clearing up later on. But we're slipping our way up this hill, trying not to bust our asses, and we get to near the top of this homeless encampment where she goes over and she helps this homeless community, and due to issues with her neighbor and her landlord wanting her to get rid of her dogs, she's moving out, and these people that she's been helping for a while turn around and dig out a spot, an area for her. They dig into the ground for the floor to make it flat and level and everything, and put this really nice white canvas tent up there for her. So we make it up there and go in, and she turns on the propane heater and such, and so we're dinking around with the FLIR camera, and also it was so quiet as far as nature and such. You can hear the river going by, but you also just hear silence unless somebody is moving around talking or whatnot. One guy's over there rapping, and it's nice to have hobbies, but I think this feller needs to find another one, because it wasn't the greatest. I was thinking of some lyrics last night of my own. Oh man, but I'm not going to say it. It's too rude. It was like basically back towards him. He's a cool guy. He's nice and everything, but dang it all. All throughout the night, he keeps going off. Then there's other sounds. It sounds like, and I actually didn't say anything, but had to smile to myself, because you keep hearing like, I don't know if I can, like this scratching occasionally against the tent. And she's like, "Do you hear that? What is that noise?" And I was like, I was just smiling to myself, because it reminded me of a, scary camp story where the thing outside occasionally scratches on the side of the tent till you go out to check it out. But I stood up and went over there and put my ear to it, not literally, but right next to it, to listen to what it was. And it sounded like basically when the wind would blow or the air pressure in this tent would change, it would suck in and then blow back out. So you have an in and out thing going on within this tent, and the thing like the curtain or whatnot that she had hanging up around the tent for extra layers to keep it warmer in there, were just rubbing against the tent because it had snow on it and had some pressure going on there. So we debunked that, but this was the first night that she had actually gone to the tent, and people look out for each other there. And so I think they saw the lights on in there, because we're both sitting in there warming up, getting ready to ascend up the rest of this mountain. And you hear different random people saying different things, and then coming and walking around the tent and letting you know they're there. One odd thing that I forgot to mention, she not only has this white tent right there, but there's a tent next to hers that I didn't realize at first was for her sons. If they decide to come stay with her, they have, a place that they can go on their own and stay in there. When we first get there, you can hear a man in there like coughing and saying a couple things or whatnot. But you would hear him roll over and coughing, and eventually she tells me, "Yeah, that tent right there, that's my son's tent. I don't know who the hell's in there." I'm like, what the hell? Like, I didn't even realize this until now, so that was freaky. Of course, we didn't go over there and open it up and investigate. Like, I'm not going to deal with who might be in there. We don't know. We do a little recon there. At the bottom of the tent, you can unzip it, of course, and I'm showing her, with this night vision camera, you can zoom in, zoom out, etc. And we're just kind of doing surveillance to make sure it's safe before we go out. But then we decide, instead of, going up the mountain and making all this noise, because each step you're taking is like, because the snow has fallen, and there's also this crusty layer from where the sun had hit it the day before, plus the fresh snow on top of it. So we decide to just stay around her area and use the FLIR camera to stick around. There was a certain spirit that popped up in almost all of the FLIR pictures that we caught, but there was also at one point looked like one of those crawler thingies that looks human, but it generally walks around on all fours. And then all of a sudden it stands up. Hi, Sister Sandra. Hello, Sleepy. All of a sudden it stands up, and it looks kind of like a lizard person thing. Like, it's got a human face. Looks somewhat like a human body, but then it's got, looks like, okay, somebody pulled up a picture last night in our after party of a salamander. The things on the side of its head kind of look like that, but a salamander only has 3 little filler thingies. This looked like an actual fish's side fin that it uses to move about. I didn't get any creepy feelings off of it, like I wasn't creeped out or anything, but it was very interesting. So we want to go up there again and check that out, but we went back to her house and cooked up some hamburgers and ate and talked a bit more about life and other random things. Oh yeah, we also used, up at the camp, the SPB7 again, and we didn't use the big speaker that I had brought for the house because, we're trying to stay quiet and not disturb anybody. So we're listening extra close, and you can see on this app that we're using as well, which is the Ghost Radar, different things coming in and checking us out. It's funny, at different portions, of course, you can hear like different radio stations coming through, different things like that. But at one point, you could tell, or we could tell, because we grew up in the area, kinda. I showed up in this area when I think I was in 4th grade. But how Native Americans speak and generally what their voice sounds like, their dialect or accent, if you want to call it. But he came through a couple times and said he was Ute and said a few other things, but it took him a little while to get comfortable with us, but there was definitely some native stuff going on up there. My sister had told me about, as they dug up there for different things, not them, but different surveyors or whatnot, that there had been artifacts found, and you can find artifacts in dwellings and things all over the place here if you dig or if you look. So there is old native stuff going on there, but it was really cool. Anywho's, back to the house. We had cheeseburgers, a couple beers, talking everything. Sarah gets in the shower and then gets in bed. I make a bed on the couch, which I had to kick one of her dogs out of. I'm like, dude, this is not your bed. Laying there with my back towards the bookshelf and face towards the back of the couch. The sun at this point is coming up. And I always try to beat the sun to bed. Yes, I do stay up late, but I try to make it in bed before the sun comes up, at the latest. Laying there, and as I'm drifting off to sleep, all of a sudden, I hear somebody walking up behind me. And I think maybe it's her son. Turn around and look, nobody's there. Drift off to sleep again. Again, you hear somebody getting closer. Turn around, nobody's there. And this is going on all night. Or all morning, trying to sleep. Every time I go to drift off to sleep, they're waking me up. Eventually, over towards my sister's room, I hear some noise. I think it's her coming out of her bedroom door, and the wood stove is right behind the couch that I was on. And I hear, it sounds like a female and a male whispering back and forth. And so I peek my head up and look, thinking it's Sarah and her son, but nobody's there. I'm like, what the hell? Get comfortable again, about to drift off. Right above where my head is, I hear it again, this whispering. I can't understand what they're saying, but I peek my head up and look, nothing's there. And then again, they did it right behind where I was. And I didn't feel threatened or freaked out or anything, but I could not sleep. So I might have gotten an hour of sleep, not last night, but the night before. So last night on the show, man, I think I did good, but my brain just felt fried. I felt I called it comfortably numb, yet uncomfortably numb. I feel numb, I feel like I'm floating, but at the same time, this isn't comfortable because I'm not used to it. So yeah, it was an interesting night and interesting following day. I look forward to doing it again, and it had been a while since I had been ghost hunting, so I actually really appreciated being able to get out again and do some investigating. And I was telling you guys about the spirit portal that I purchased. It was supposed to arrive on Friday and didn't arrive until yesterday, so finally got that, so I'm looking forward to using that as well. Put all the batteries in it. Holy crap, I think it takes like 12 batteries to run the pedal and the equalizer and also We couldn't get it to work, and I think it's because you have to plug the speaker in. So, I'm going to try it again. I put it together right before I did the show last night, and I figured that's the next step. We're going to try plugging it into the charger and see if it'll work at that point. But yeah, that was my adventure for Friday night, and I wanted to do it Thursday, but the soonest I could do it was Friday because I do have to mom it up all week and do homeschool and whatnot with the kids. So it was a really good Friday, and it had been a long time since I got to hang out with my sisters. So it was just really good to spend that time and have some fun. Oh, that was another thing I forgot. Here, let me take a drink really quick. Okay, so I told you about slipping up the mountain. Then you got to come back down. And this is another thing, even if because she did get a call today, she does have a place to live. So she won't have to go to the encampment. But I was telling her that night, I was like, because I'm thinking about the descend. We ascended up this mountain. Now we have to descend. And girl, this is going to be some slippery, foolish shit. So I told her as we're sitting there, we got to come back up here, even if you're not living here, and put some steps or something in here. And if we work as a community, we can really get some shit done. And I guess they do all kind of work together up there to get stuff done. So that's a project we're going to do. But on the way back down that slope was some slippery, scary stuff. And kept it together, was doing pretty good until one point, I swear, like, my arms and my legs and my head just all went in several different directions. It was insane. My legs are sore. My shoulders are sore. Pretty sure my head almost popped off because the next day, right in between my shoulder blades, it felt like my back was out. But yeah, it was fun. We laughed a lot, talked a lot, and got a plan going. That was pretty cool. Later on, I'm going to get into those FLIR pictures and bring them to size because they are actually only, you see on the screen this, I believe it's a 2x1 picture, might even be a 1.5x1 picture. And when you upload it and put it on your computer, believe it or not, it's the very same damn size. So I got to go in and make those 8x10s or 3x5s or whatever so I can share it where you guys can actually see some detail. But we got some pretty good stuff. Okay, so going back to Ghost Tracks, Haunting Tales Along the Rails by Elizabeth A. Green and Susie Garrison Meyer. If you guys are interested and can buy this book, I highly recommend it. It cost me $16.95, but it's a really good read, and these ladies did a really excellent job putting it together. Okay, so on the back of the book it says, railroaders and others who linger along the Silverton and Durango narrow gauge railroad tracks have seen things, heard things, felt things. Strange things have happened. People have lived and died or narrowly escaped death along the Animas River, which, if you don't know, the Animas River is the river of lost souls. Very strange. Okay, so indomitable souls who in one way or another challenged the mountains, sometimes the mountains won. Maybe, just maybe, they are behind the haunting experiences that make people say, I don't believe in ghosts, but... So last time we read chapter 1, which was about Durango, basically, and the haunting they have there at the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad Museum. And it's also where they have the train come in and depart and do everything there. It's been there for quite a long time, but it's a very awesome place. So if you ever come to Durango, make sure you go check out the museum. Not only do they have ghosts, but they have all kinds of cool old stuff in there. Chapter 2, Animas Valley. And again, I'm going to repeat, and I'm going to type it in the chat room before I forget again. If you guys want to call in, feel free to do so by Skype or by phone. at 1-970-335-9596. That's 1-970-335-9596. Animas Valley. So look past the houses, the golf course, the RV parks, and the businesses. Since the retreat of the last glaciers, this valley has been an enticing place, fed by river and streams and populated by herds of deer and elk. Winter arrives later here than it does in the high country and departs earlier. Many have considered it a promised land, but promised to whom? There's not enough room in this paradise for everyone who wants to live here. Can you sense the rivalries and resentments that plague this place for centuries? From the earliest inhabitants, people have disagreed over who belonged in this beautiful valley. Settlers thought that the question had been resolved when the government signed a treaty with the Utes. The Indians would have to go. Soon, simple one-room cabins spread out across the landscape, and smoke curled skyward from sky chimneys. Hand-dug ditches carried water from the river to farm fields and orchards. Cattle and horses grazed on lush green grass. There was a sense of community among many of those early settlers. They helped one another, shared tools and supplies, celebrated holidays together, and came to one another's aid in times of adversity. But life in paradise wasn't easy. Crops could fail, game could be scarce. In difficult times, neighbors became rivals and coveted what others had. No one could have guessed that the greatest danger laid in the lifeblood of the valley, the very thing that made this paradise so beautiful. So this particular ghost story, is called The Waterfall and the Englishman. Hey, Sleepy Dave. All right. What happened by the waterfall one spring morning in 1876 would haunt the family who farmed there for the rest of their lives. It started out simple enough. The Lamberts had come west from Kentucky. They tried Silverton for a while, but life in the mountains was harsh. Free land lured them south to the Animas Valley. They found a beautiful place where a creek plunged over the red sandstone cliff to the valley below, then flowed across the grassy flats to the Animas River. Land around the waterfall hadn't been taken yet, so Hugh and 3 of his sons staked their homestead claims. They built small, crude cabins and settled in. Then trouble arrived. An Englishman homesteaded land across the wagon road from the Lamberts. He was ambitious and had big plans to grow fruits and vegetables to feed the folks up in the mountains around Silverton. He needed water to make that happen. Some people say the Englishman should have known better. The law was on the Lambert side, or at least it should have been. In this land of snow and ice, water was, and still is, a prized possession. The Englishman figured he should have a share of the waterfall. He marched onto the Lambert place and set about diverting some of that water to his land. It didn't sit well with Lambert. "Get off my land or I'll shoot you dead," Lambert warned, hoping that would end the dispute. It didn't. The Englishman was cagey. He might not be entitled to that water, but he knew he could get Lambert in trouble for threatening him. He swore out an arrest warrant against Hugh. Deputy Sheriff Ed Harris had no choice. He had to serve the warrant, even if the judge would just throw it out. Now that warrant was more than Hugh could take. "If Harris comes on my land to arrest me, I'll shoot him right between the eyes," he warned. By dawn, Harris had assembled a posse of 58 men outside the Lambert cabin. Still, it all could have worked out if there weren't a young Irish boy coming along that morning. Harris climbed up on a big boulder, cautioned everyone to hold fire, and called out to Lambert. "I ain't coming out. Hugh yelled from the side cabin. "You can't make me." "Gol darn it, Hugh, you come out peaceable like, and we can settle this thing," Harris responded. "No, just get off my land," came Hugh's stubborn reply. It was all too exciting for the Irish boy. Impulsively, he pulled the trigger. Hearing the gunshot and figuring they were about to break into the cabin, Hugh fired back. The bullet found its mark just as he'd promised. Harris fell from the boulder, dead. Bullets flew in every direction. Somehow Hugh and two of his sons escaped unscathed, leaving 24-year-old Riley to protect his mother. He was arrested, but never charged. Hugh wasn't as lucky. Some folks said it was self-defense. He was only protecting his family and home, but he ended up going to prison for killing the deputy sheriff. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. A year or so later, someone pulled up 700 fruit trees the Englishmen had planted. What the crack? That is insane. How are you going to pull up all these fruit trees that could feed you and your family and your livestock? That is ridiculous. People said it must have been the Lamberts. Still, the Englishman prospered. Even without the waterfall from the Falls Creek, he managed to build up his home ranch. Once the railroad came through a few years later, the loading station was right next to his land. He found a way to grow lettuce in hothouses, even in cold weather. With success came respect, no matter what had happened that spring morning. It was different from Lambert's. That confrontation at the waterfall set a course for Hugh and his boys. The governor commuted Hugh's prison sentence, but trouble followed the family wherever they went. Before long, one had been shot in the back by a sheriff, and another gunned down by a saloon keeper. Another was shot by a jealous friend, but survived. Hugh sold the ranch to Denver and Rio Grande construction engineer Thomas Wigglesworth and moved north. But misfortune dogged him even there. He got into a land dispute, shot the other man, then was shot and left for dead himself. For the Lamberts, at least, it was all the fault of that beautiful waterfall. Damn pioneers and their shenanigans. That's a very cool waterfall, and it is the only one in that valley. I was actually going to go up there and hike the back of it to get to the waterfall, because you can't go there on the bottom portion. It is owned by someone. But I believe BLM, which not Black Lives Matter, but the Bureau of Land Management owns that property. So you can go and check out the waterfall from the top portion, but not the bottom. It's a really beautiful valley. All right, so this one is called A Fortunate Family. Arthur Ambold was among the lucky ones. When scarlet fever spread through Silverton in 1881, the almost 4-year-old became ill. The little boy suffered complications, but unlike many of the other victims, he recovered. His parents, Gustavus and Charlotte, had a meat market in Silverton, but also owned property in the Animas Valley where they raised chickens, cattle, and sheep, as well as horses. In the year before the train reached Silverton, they hauled 120 dozen eggs in a wagon over the toll road to Silverton and sold them at their market. Gus drove 150 hogs through the mountains to the fledgling mining town, butchered them, and sold the meat. The enterprising husband and father seemed to have the golden touch. In 1880, he bought an interest in a mine just outside Silverton, paying for it with a quarter of beef. The following year, he sold it to Eastern investors for $15,000. In 1882, with his son restored to health, Gus loaded his family into a covered wagon and headed south on the toll road. They were done with the severe climate and all the adversities that went with it. They built a house on the north side of Durango and spent most weekends at their Elkhorn Ranch in Animas Valley. And it's still called Elkhorn today. That's pretty cool. There was no bridge across the river, but no one minded. The children loved to ford the river on horseback, just above Hermosa Creek. When the river was high, the horses swam across, pulling a wagon load of children. Within a few years of their move, the Ambold family was complete. 3 girls and 2 boys. Life was good for all of them. Gus had a real gift for raising vegetables as well as livestock. One year, he proudly displayed a cabbage that was 55 inches in diameter and a beet that weighed 10 pounds. That's a big-ass beet. He was growing enough food to supply markets in Durango and Silverton. There was no more need to worry about eggs breaking or animals getting lost. They had the train to take everything up to the mountain town, but misfortune lay just around the corner. The Animas was running high in the early summer of 1885 when 8-year-old Arthur mounted his horse and rode into the river. The animal stumbled and Arthur fell in, splashing wildly. It was no use. The current was too strong for the boy. He slipped below the surface and disappeared. His distraught parents offered a $200 reward for their son's body if it was found within 5 days. Eventually, Arthur's remains were found 18 miles downstream in a tangle of driftwood, but then the reward had been reduced to only a liberal payment. The river would claim another victim in the family of 4 years later. One day in 1889, 4-year-old Gus was delirious with fever. For reasons no one could understand, he wandered down to the Animas below his house. Gus fell into a pond on the riverbank and drowned. Good fortune had ended for both father and son. Chapter 3, Baker's Bridge. If you look through the trees, you just might see it, the narrow spot where the river squeezes between rock walls. The bridge that extends over the chasm is not the first. There used to be a town at that spot, a short-lived one that all too soon became the first ghost town along the Animas River. See, I've lived in this area for so long and I did not realize that this area was a ghost town, as people are still living there today, but I never knew there was a town there. All right, let's see. People found their way here with visions of a future, of opportunity. They built a bridge across the river, the first to span the waterway. They cut trees, scraped bark from the logs, and built cabins. They split wood for shingles. They established businesses and started farming. Why here? In this particular place. But it was the fresh, cold water that gushed from the nearby spring or the hot springs on the other side of the river. Maybe it was the narrow gorge that would require only a short bridge. Or maybe it was the flakes of gold someone claimed to have found. Yet within months, talk turned from possibilities to broken promises. The winter was brutally cold, the snow unbearably deep. Disappointment pervaded the frontier town, and soon distant politics divided it. The cabins are gone now, disintegrated like the aspirations that spawned that short-lived city by the river. But to this day, people find things those dreamers left behind. This is called the Overnight Ghost Town. In the beginning, they were all men, here for one thing, gold. They poured in 1 foot, on horseback, in wagons, pulled by sturdy oxen. There was nothing genteel or cultured about the town they decided to call Animas City. The name would prove to be prophetic. All too soon, nothing but spirits would remain here. They lived in tents or cabins made of rough-hewn logs. It would be months before the first women and children arrived. The town was a resting point, a refuge from snow and ice. It wasn't meant to be fancy. There were no churches or schools, not even a post office. Still, they kept coming. 12 one day, 100 another. The promise of gold was a lure few men could resist, and the word of Charles Baker, 1860, discovery brought them rushing in. Baker had been involved in Colorado's 1858 gold rush near Denver, so his story of the riches to be had near Baker's Park, now Silverton, was credible. Other prospectors had followed up with rich discoveries. With every retelling of their stories, the nuggets grew bigger, shone brighter, and became easier to find until they reportedly jumped into the pockets of any man brave enough to seek them. The San Juan excitement took hold, and Animas City swelled to more than 1,000 inhabitants. Some said more than twice that number lived there at least for a while. Solidly built cabins suggested they planned to reside there permanently, but they didn't. By the middle of summer of 1861, the bustling encampment was empty and silent, and it would stay that way for a good long time. Few members of the Baker party came back. When homesteaders arrived along that stretch of the valley in 1875, they found roofless cabins. There were household goods and even signs of garden plots planted in 1861, but never harvested. Farming and mining tools had been cached for their owner's return. The bridge across the Animas still held, and to this day its modern replacement is called Baker's Bridge. Yet 2 reported vestiges of the Animas City settlement and its residents have never been found. A merchant by the name of Patrick Armijo reportedly stashed 15 barrels of whiskey rather than hauling them back to Santa Fe when he left. What is wrong with this man? Jeez. The casks apparently disintegrated into the soil before anyone could find them. Even more intriguing are the caches of gold ore that Baker and some of his partners were said to have buried upriver from Baker's Park. As the story goes, they marked the site by carving subtle signs on trees, and each member of the party was given a map. But when the few who survived the Civil War returned, they discovered that more recent miners had cut down the trees. Oh my gosh. Why? With their memories obscured by what they'd experienced fighting for the Confederacy, they failed to find a single cache. Modern miners say they're probably still searching. This story is called The Hostage. Sarah Chivington was barely 16 when she married Thomas Pollock in Denver. She could not have imagined how the first year of that marriage would test her. Thomas was a resourceful man. If someone needed horseshoes, he was the blacksmith. If they needed cabinets or a bench, he was the woodworker. If they needed to hang a man, he was the executioner. At Baker's Bridge, they needed a merchant. Thomas stepped up, even though it would require him to leave his young bride for weeks at a time as he trekked south to Santa Fe for supplies. It happened soon after Thomas left. The settlement they called Animas City was buzzing with nearly 1,000 people, some of them prospectors. Every day they headed for the hills. Some keen observer must have known that Thomas had gone to Santa Fe for provisions, and the next thing Sarah knew, she'd been on the back of a ute horse galloping away from her cabin. Had anyone looked for her? Surely so. She had to believe that, but they hadn't come to rescue her. Dejected and desperate, she escaped and found her way back to Animas City. The whole camp had emptied out. The friends with whom she'd celebrated the 4th of July by waving a hand-sewn flag were gone. The prospectors from whom she'd known she should keep a safe distance were gone. Everyone was gone, and they must have left in a hurry. The canvas-roofed houses still stood, many of them with shingles stacked beside them, waiting for a work party. The furniture remained too, such as it was, and the dishes and curtains and even the prospecting tools. But there was no food. If there had been, Thomas wouldn't have needed to go all the way to Santa Fe. Where had everyone gone? Where was she going to go? Sarah sank onto the dusty bed in their cabin and sobbed. I thought I'd finally be safe, but I'm all alone in the middle of the wilderness. Being alone in a place where she'd often felt so safe was almost worse than being held hostage in an Indian camp. There at least she'd had food, and if she hadn't been treated kindly, at least she hadn't been abandoned. To be alone in a region that seemed completely devoid of white settlers, that seemed to be a death sentence, especially to a woman expecting a child. All she could do was try to survive one day at a time and hope that someone, anyone, would return to camp. Fate was on Sarah Pollock's side. She wasn't entirely alone. In the Exodus, one man, too old, too ill, had been left behind, and when he heard Sarah's sobs, he hobbled to her tent. He had a story to tell. "Well, it was the war, you know. Captain Baker himself, he went to the South, and some of the fellows followed him. Some of the others went to the Union. Sad state of affairs, 'cause they's gonna be fighting each other." Sarah had known that far away the drums of war were beating. How could she not know? Her father was an army man. South Carolina had seceded from the Union before Christmas, followed by 5 other states in January and another in February. Although news came slowly to the mining district, it had come with the high country still closed to them. The prospectors had nothing to do but gnaw on it and fight over it. It was no wonder that when the first shots of Civil War struck Fort Sumter, the men were ready to take up arms, defensive families and home states. There was little to keep them in the San Juans, but all of them? The rest of them, they just up and left. Placer mines done played out, and hard rock mining is awful hard work. Injuns been raiding, and after they took you, they got real bold. Just didn't seem worth the effort no more, so they up and left. Sarah could believe that. Life had been hard here at its best. But there was one thing she did not understand. "Are you saying that Thomas left without me?" "Don't know," said the old prospector. "Said he'd be back, but he ain't been yet. Maybe he ain't coming." Sarah went back to her cabin to cry again. Now she had a companion, but he wasn't someone who could help her. How would she get through the days? Who would deliver her baby? Would they die in the wilderness, alone? Far south in New Mexico, Thomas faced struggles of his own, trying to bring back wagons filled with food and supplies. Fearful of Indian attacks, he finally gave up and made his way back to the San Juans alone and empty-handed. When he reached Animas City, he was shocked by the emptiness as his young wife had been. There was nothing more for them in these mountains, and so, less than a year after the settlement was founded, the couple abandoned their dreams and returned to Denver. Did they abandon the old man as well? His fate remains a mystery. Well, I hope they didn't use that old prospector behind. That'd be sad. I was about to do... Yins, hold on. We's about to go to a musical break. Okay, so on this music break... Hey, Skywatcher. Hey, Brave Sir Robin. We have Mystique with I Want It All. We have Mocha T with Future Plan. And we have Britt Casey with Mr. Cellman, as well as Mystique with If I Slip. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
Yeah, okay. I want it all. Even if you're stepping out of bounds, keep ballin'. I want it all. Diamonds and cars. Building big yachts, close up the stars. Buying the bars. Own it is ours. I want it all. Big or small. No more of a downfall. I want it all. I want it all. I want it all. I could sign your baseball. Money making it rain fall on a big mall. Owning the whole block. Driving to the mailbox. Cruising in my yacht. I gotta get up out this box. I want it all. I always knew that I would be rich. Don't doubt for a minute. Speaking to existence. Hoping and feeling to give away $1 million. Just be chilling in the tallest building. Say hello to the mission and vision with me. Hello. Watch cost about 150. Rolex diamond luxury city. Next to Movado model. Cocked it before the arrival. Lamborghini with bass high. I could hear it all. Sit back, sun roof up. Is the stars. High performance car. Super saloon next exclusive rims, spinning hard. Always wanted to build a park. Obstacles to enter, a lot more for the kids. Recreation centers, I want it all. Red bricks, cream coated, painted marble fountain as I pass. Walking the stone path, heated pool, home theater for all of my family. Wanna do it for my city. Can't wait to see the chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. I want it all. Diamonds and cars, building big yachts, close up the stars. Buying the bars, own it is ours. I want it all, big or small. No more up or downfall. I want it all. I want it all. I want it all. I could sign your baseball. Money making it rain fall on a big mall. Owning the whole block, driving to the mailbox. Cruising in my yacht, I gotta get up out this box. I want it all. I'm inside of a dungeon, life involves repercussions. Convince that consequences leave me boxed up, feeling suction. How could this bad mistake have me thinking ways to escape? Catching the case, wanting it all has been replaced. Look at a cellmate face, I know they can't relate. I know trust in the soul, heck no, it's to stay safe. Up in the place where my food is cold on my plate. It ain't no breaks, it's a time to concentrate. Watching my back, got stabbed by too many snakes. Who times dragged against the bars is a rude away. Mind race, body cold, hard to embrace. The situation made me think, why did I miss the hate? And common sense of being solved in so many ways. During the problem thoughts, I forgot I want it all. Forgot I had a dream to rule it, forgot to remember that all my fans had a thought that I can have it all. I want it all, staring at the walls, walking down the halls, wait for my collect call. Supposed to be at a concert hall. Instead, I want it all behind bars. Can't reach for a star. It's a fear. I want it all. 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 Diamonds and cars. Building big yards. Close up the stars. Buying the bars. Own it is ours. I want it all. Big or small, no more of a downfall. I want it all. Diamonds and cars. Building big yachts, close up the stars. Buying the bars. Own it is ours. I want it all. Big or small, no more up or downfall. I want it all. I want it all. I want it all. I can sign your baseball. Money making it rain fall on a big mall. Owning the whole block, driving to the mailbox. Cruising in my yacht, I gotta get up out this box. I want it all. Mystique.
Boca T, let's get it. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. How could you love a man who never been loved? How could you show him something he so used to lust? I know I'm young, but I know I can be the one. If he open up his eyes and know I'm the one he can trust. Support and good loving is all a nigga need. All that bullshit niggas give you is a test to see if you'll leave. And if you leave, you are not a strong queen. Cause a queen will stay still, pray and be there for her king. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. I love the way he carry himself. I love his swagger. He had me at happily ever after. No fairy tale, this man I really wanna capture. A peek at you, got my heart beating faster. No road runner, but you got my mind racing. Still can call you up and don't know what to say. My friends might say I'm dumb, my friends might say I'm stupid. Then again, why take advice from single women? Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Let's create a kingdom and have a Prince Wednesday. Build an empire, a dream I desire. Like Candy Crush on the Monday, got butterflies feeling funny. Blunt out the blunt, can't get no higher. Like a fiend who needs sexual healing. Boy, bless me with that business. You're my teacher, you get my undivided attention. Boy, would you come my way and answer a simple question?
Hello? I'm trying to call my baby, but it's poor reception, cause she ain't picking up. Hello? Hello? Listen, Mr. Operator, I've been up all day and I'm trying to dial my baby's number. See, it only rings straight to the machine. 617. Now I know something must be wrong with this cell phone, cause my baby knows she wouldn't hang up on me. So tell me what's going on. I see most of the time phone only ring twice. How you doing, boo? Cool, how's your date? Nice. Now she ain't picking up, plus a text her. Put it to your plane, she's the one to get next to. It's not just the way, it's all day with affection. I'm hoping this detection is poor reception. Straight to the machine, mean it's like clicking my call, get connected quick. I'm saying, hey, Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Why she ain't picking up, yo? I see the phone rings quite a few times before any answer. And I know she's home, well at least till 3. And I know she's home. Now I don't mean to be any bother operator, but could you just check and connect this call for me? Cause I know she's home. Now see, the first time I call, I'm like, maybe she working. And the second time I call, I'm like, little bit hurting. But the third time I call, I'm like, going berserk. And now half a day gone, can't get her on the horn. Usually in the morning, maybe it's something wrong. I mean, she wouldn't take this long to call back. See, we tight like that, she's supposed to be mine. So could you please try it one more time? Hey, Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Why she ain't picking up, yo? For some reason, it's like she ain't home. Just wanna get my baby on the phone. Now I know that she's there all alone. So can you please hook up my cellular phone? Hey, Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Why she ain't picking up, yo? Why she ain't picking up, yo?
I got dreams and ambition, I'm ready and I'm willing, I'm meeting this competition. You don't wanna be my dinner. The whole shift changed when the music bang. Love the look on their face. I got dreams and ambition, I'm ready and willing, I'm meeting this competition. You don't wanna be my dinner. The whole shift changed when the music bang. I just love to see the look on their face, and if I slip, I'ma bounce right slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I'm meeting this competition. If I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. You don't wanna be my dinner. I'm about to do this to death, cause I know they watching. Don't understand the talking, tell that dog to quit barking. I'm an entrepreneur, so correct when you talking. Bet I get it back and take a loss to be a boss. Coming fast and I'm switching lanes with it, crisscross. Never messing with you, rapping ratchets, what you really thought. And my jab steady dreaming, chasing missions for the fam. Understand I'm flowing lands from the Milwaukee brand. Thought you knew you can't wear my shoes, not do what I do. It's a mob, I don't pick and choose, just stick it to the rules. Keep my beast above and beneath. They know I'm beauty. What you need, I got what you need. When it come to it, who been grinding all winter, so the summer extra lit. I've been in and out the booth trying to weigh up my greatness. It ain't no time to play with it, and if I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I got dreams and ambition, man. If I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I'm ready and willing, even if I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I'm meeting this competition. If I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. You don't wanna be my dinner.
With great precision, I'm on a mission. Lots of ambition, my transition. The time was ticking, willing and wishing. Just listen, I punch harder than Sonny Liston. They fishing, looking for teeth. It look like Lipton. They tripping. I am the king, whose competition? Collisions, conclusion is I'm in a position, lifting, transcending beyond their comprehension. Time to hang it up, swaggerific, the lynchman. You know how this goes. Just follow the street codes. We make it look easy, like we putting in cheat codes. Beauty and the beast is in beast mode. Haters on the sidelines, I tell them to keep score. I go crazy on the beat, tell Spaz to keep it low. You know Mystique, close with a toaster, you won't toast.
And if I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I got dreams and ambition, man. If I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I'm ready and willing, even if I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I'm meeting this competition. If I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. You don't wanna be my dinner.
When I slipped, I really cracked my back. I think I tore my cuff. Gonna need some surgery. That's how I felt this morning. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the only figure I could see, because I didn't see myself, but remember those little guys that were made of wood and string, and you'd pull the string and he'd be taut and a person, and then you let go of the string and he'd be all loose and whatever. The way my knees bent when I slipped last night, and my arms and popped out different directions, and then pretty sure my head tried to pop off because my back was out in between my shoulder blades. Luckily, got it loose, but holy shnikes, I didn't feel it till today, and I did not know that my knees could bend those directions. I'm surprised my knees don't hurt, but my freaking hamstrings and stuff are hurting from climbing that slope. It was fun. It was good to spend time with my sister. Alrighty. So, welcome back to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Feel free to call in if you have an experience you'd like to talk about, paranormal, UFO, stuff going on in your life, you just need to talk to somebody, call 1-970-335-9596. 1-970-335-9596. All right, so this one, and again, we are reading from the book Ghost Tracks, Haunting Tales Along the Rails. And I have to laugh at myself because when I typed it in earlier on Spreaker to make the title and then the description, I wrote tales as in, tales. Haunting tales along the rails. Some of those broads are scary. Kind of like lot lizards. Okay, so this story from the book Ghost Tracks, Haunting Tales Along the Rails by Elizabeth A. Green and Susie Garrison Meyer. Feel free to go online to find this. My copy, which I bought, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago at Maria's bookstore, cost me $16.95, but it's really well put together. They've done a lot of homework, and there's some really cool pictures in this here book, if you'd like to see some of the beauty and such around my area. Alrighty. The Highbrow Haunt. The Nomad, the Durango and Silverton's opulent, hauntingly mysterious private parlor car is not for riffraff ghosts. There are reports of a grandly attired Victorian lady and a natty gentleman apparition being seen aboard. Just who these specters are might be on where they boarded. The Nomad remains shrouded in mystery. One car attendant says the Phantom is an unfriendly female, while another employee has seen a man in a blue vest and black shirt. Whatever their gender or number, something or someone flings bottles off shelves and locks people out. To avoid trouble, one attendant carefully announces her arrival in the car and inquires whether the ghost is having a good day. Could the ghosts be one-time passengers or railroad workers? When it was built in 1879, the car had chairs that swiveled and reclined. After 7 years, it was partitioned into 3 sections, offering superior accommodations for well-heeled passengers. In 1909, it even carried President William Howard Taft to preside over the dedication of an important water project. This car is the epitome of Golden Age influence, with its carved woodwork, colorful floral upholstery, monogrammed crushed velvet pillows, ornate lighting fixtures, heavy draperies dripping with fringe, and distinctly 19th century oil paintings. It has a kitchen and restroom along with 3 separate compartments. In the middle of the car, a narrow side hall blocks the view forward and backwards. A rear observation platform offers unobstructed vistas from the back of the train. To be sure, the sumptuous Nomad has had its rough patches. There was the time it plunged over a cliff, and a time it rolled onto its side. Least dignified of all were the years it languished in a weed-choked Texas field. Did the ghost first appear in January 1917 when the luxury car crashed, carrying several distinguished passengers? They called the train the Millionaire's Special that day, with its combination of dining and commissary cars to meet every need of the wealthy businessmen. The men were returning from Silverton, where they had looked into buying a gold mine. Just south of Rockwood, on a sharp curve known as Granite Point, the locomotive inexplicably turned over on its side. The cars behind it plummeted over the steep bank. Bodies flew, windows shattered, dishes and glasses spilled out the dining car windows and were smashed on the rocks, where they remain to this day. A coal stove in one of the cars started a fire. Flames spread, igniting a second car. Somehow, the Nomad escaped the conflagration. The people inside were tossed around, injured, and certainly traumatized, but no one was killed. Unlike the burned cars, which were pushed to the base of the cliff and picked through for salvage, the Nomad was pulled back up the slope. The car was repaired and returned to service. Eventually, though, the demand for such luxury travel diminished. The car was retired in 1951 and ended up on that Texas farm. Were the ghosts there through those years of neglect, far from the tracks that could lead them home? Years later, a group of die-hard railroad fans rescued the car and renamed it, appropriately, the Nomad. It came back to its home in San Juan Mountains, but another disaster loomed in its future. Was there a ghost aboard when the Durango and Silverton celebrated the railroad's 100th anniversary in 1981? The Nomad, as always, the last car on the special train filled with celebrants. In the Adams Valley, the train moved past the home siding, a railroad passing lane of sorts between the Nomad's front and rear wheels. The switch somehow was thrown, sending the rear of the car onto the siding. The car was pulled sideways until it overturned, injuring a number of people. Once again, the Nomad was repaired and put back into service as a charter car. Clearly, this car and its notorious spirits are survivors. Whoever they are, the ghosts are more than a little possessive. Between trips, the Nomad sits quietly in the rail yard. When it is chartered, attendants have to get a car ready, restocking the kitchen and whatever supplies will be needed. While they're alone in the car, they hear footsteps. They find things out of place, put them back where they belong, then discover them out of place again and again. Doors won't open or become locked after they've been opened. One attendant has found the only way to make peace with a ghost is to clean the car thoroughly before and after each trip. For good measure, she announces, "Now don't give me a hard time." The ghostly shenanigans continue during trips. The train was carrying 125 avid photographers one day when it made the usual stop for water at Tank Creek. The bathroom had been open up to that point. Suddenly, the door was locked. Was a passenger stuck inside? The conductor knocked and called out, "Is someone in there?" but got no response. The slide lock can only be engaged from inside the bathroom, and it's too heavy for it to slip into the striker plate hole by itself. Yet the door to the empty restroom was firmly locked. Once the train returned to the depot, the outside window trim had to be removed so one could get into the bathroom and unlock the door. Most employees like working in the car, in spite of such annoying but innocent ghostly pranks. But one time, things went a little too far. I need to take a drink of my Monster. I'm feeling parched. All right. So, the train was returning from a movie shoot with only 3 people aboard. The engineer and a fireman in the locomotive and the conductor who was moving back and forth among the cars. It was getting dark as they left Rockwood, headed toward Granite Point and the site of the Millionaire's Special Wreck. Hold on a second. I just got distracted by the chat here. You guys are crazy. Okay, so the conductor went back to the Nomad to light the kerosene-fueled marker lights that hung on the side and the outside rear corners of the car. Like the taillights of a car, the metal and heavy glass lanterns delineate the back of the train for both the engineer and any traffic waiting to cross the tracks. He lit the 2 lanterns, hung them on their brackets, and left the car. A few minutes later, as the train rounded a curve, the conductor looked back and noticed that the lantern on the right side was no longer lit. Although it was unusual, one of the lights going out was not impossible. Maybe the wind extinguished it, he thought. At the same time, telling himself it was unlikely since the flame was fully enclosed. When the train curved in the other direction, he saw that the second lantern was out as well. He had never heard of that happening. He returned to the Nomad. Maybe they were low on fuel, he thought, and took them down. They weren't. He shrugged, relit them, and rehung them. This time, he stayed in the car for a while to make sure they stayed lit. They did, so he left. When he glanced back later, both lights were out again. This is really weird, he thought. As he re-entered the car, he was stunned. It was incredibly cold. Temperatures drop at night in Colorado, even in the middle of August, but it was like an icebox. Just then, the door to the middle compartment slammed. He started down the narrow hallway, his view of the back portion blocked by a wall. Suddenly, a bright light flared in the rear compartment. Fire flickered and danced in both... Hold on one second. Let me put on my headphones so we don't get an echo. All right. Who are we talking to? Is this brave Sir Robin?
Yes, it is brave Sir Robin.
That's funny. I put my headphones on, but I did not plug them in. How are you doing? What is up? Cool. Well, did you have something that's happened recently? Something paranormal or anything that you called to talk about? Okay.
University Heights was an elementary school that opened up in 1908 and closed down in the 1980s. And so I got an EVP of this little girl called Evie, but I asked if anybody wanted to play, and I rolled a tennis ping pong ball, and it came back to me. And then it started moving in circles. And then when I was walking away to go to the principal's office, I got a tap on my left shoulder.
That's crazy. What did the EVP say?
It just said, "My name's Evie." And you can tell it sounded like a child.
Did you feel creeped out, or did your hair raise due to like the energy around or anything like that?
No, I just thought that was cool that I got an EVP like that.
That is super cool. And you got touched by a ghost.
And because it was very clear.
Do you know where it's at? Is there any way, like, sometime in the near future or whatever we could hear it? Because that's awesome.
I would have to find it.
Yeah, you should try to find it so we can hear it sometime. Like, not tonight, so don't worry about it right now, but later on in the future, if you want to, come back in and share it with us. Catching evidence is awesome because, I don't know, for me it's proof, because there's so many naysayers, you know?
Yeah.
But it's cool that you had that experience.
Yeah, that was cool, actually.
Nomi over here is saying, I still can't believe the druid experience I had during the blood and supermoons, where they jumped out of the road, looked at each other, looked back at me, and disappeared while I was driving my 18-wheeler at 70 miles per hour. Because of Dad, he ain't no joke. His spirit isn't, at least. Like, his dad is a spiritual warrior on the other side, it seems. Well, I'm glad you called in and shared that.
Yeah.
How's stuff going around the house? You still got stuff going on there?
No, everything's been quiet so far.
That's cool. Well, if you want, you can hang out for a bit or whatever, or feel free to call back later if you had anything else that you wanted to talk about.
All right.
Okay. So yeah,
Have a
you can
good
stay on
night.
the line or you can go on. Thank you so much, Robin, for calling in. That's an awesome story
All right.
and experience.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. I love paranormal investigating and capturing evidence and also putting the story together. When you use these different things, ghost radio, ghost radar, ghost boxes, paranormal puck, and you get different words. You know, sometimes you'll get a few words, but a lot of times you got to kind of put it together like a puzzle and figure it out. And especially when it aligns with something that actually happened or a person that actually existed, is when you feel really good about it, especially when you can help them. But thanks again, Robin, for calling in. That was awesome. All right, let's see. Where was I? So fire flickered and danced in both marker lights. The hair on his arms stood up. He stopped and stared in disbelief. Maybe the lights could have gone out again, but there was no way they could have relit themselves. There was only one explanation: the nomad ghost. The conductor left the car and stayed away for most of the remaining trip. When he returned to the nomad, the marker lights were still lit, and it was warm inside the car as it was outside. And that's what I was just asking him, like, did the hair on your arm raise up? Like, when you get those different things going on, it's so, I don't know, so cool. I love it. And it's kind of addictive, too. I really love it. All right, so chapter 4, and this is Rockwood and the Canyon. Here and there, amidst the modern houses, there are hints of this valley's past. This small hamlet surrounded by tall rocky cliffs was once the hub of activity in the San Juans. It started with wagon roads leading to mines and mining towns throughout the mountains. Travelers on the Animas Canyon Toll Road had to stop at the toll house and pay $3 for the privilege of bouncing and jostling along the route up into the mountains. While in Rockwood, they could change horses, get something to eat, and even buy supplies before heading north. Building of the railroad tracks spawned a tent city teeming with men who willingly faced danger every day. It was a noisy, raucous, optimistic place. Rather than follow the toll road, the train would go through the 400-foot deep Animas River Canyon, clinging to a narrow ledge far above the water. This was the staging area for that work. Black powder explosions repeatedly shook the ground and made people's ears ring. A stream of supply wagons rumbled in and carrying ties, spikes, and rails for the tracks. A big mess tent provided a place to rest and enjoy hearty food. Nearby, a herd of cattle grazed, unaware that they were destined to be part of a meal served in the tent. Some investors were certain Rockwood would be the next blooming city in the San Juans, and eagerly handed over large sums of money for land. In its heyday, the village had both railroad depot and section house, as well as post office, school, stores, saloon, sawmill, cemetery, restaurant, and hotel. A doctor even hung out his shingle here. The school closed long ago, so did the post office. There are no more stores where people can buy food or hardware or any of the other essentials of life, yet as small as it is, this settlement endures. It is the last one passengers will see until they reach Silverton. I used to clean a really nice house up in Rockwood. And out in, like, across one of the little slopes along the valley, across the way there was an old train, I think it was a caboose that was sitting over there on a patch of old tracks. It was pretty cool. Let me grab some water real quick. It's good to see all you guys in here. Got Nomi, Brave Sir Robin, Skywatcher, Jen, Sandra, Sleepy Dave. I hope I'm not missing anyone. Alrighty. This one's called No Place for a Picnic. Fire in the hole. Those were the last words they heard, and they barely had time to look around wildly for a man who had shouted, and then, fully understanding, scanned the landscape in sheer panic for the source of the danger before their whole world exploded. Light flashed, and possibly bright light, and with it, heat, and then deafening sound. The ground nearby simply disappeared. Rocks rained down on their heads, and others cascaded down the hillside. Trees flew, even the river paused for a moment. They knew they were dead. No one could survive such a close explosion. Oh my. Reminds me of back in the day, blowing open holes for the new back in Arkansas, as Kansas people say. Arkansas. Just in case, though, they picked themselves up and ran for their lives. A fortunate choice because just seconds later, the sunny spot where they'd planned to eat their lunch was blown sky high. When the dust settled, the silence was total. Smaller rocks continued to rattle downhill. The river had resumed its rushing stream. But there was no sound. If he was dead, wondered one prospector, why did his head hurt so badly? And his leg was there, blood in heaven. What? He levered himself up on one elbow. One of his friends was lying flat on his belly, but his right hand was moving, scrabbling for his hat, which was nowhere to be seen. The third companion was sitting, dazed, gingerly probing his ringing ears. Why are these men rushing down the hill? The first prospector wondered, and why couldn't he hear what they were shouting? For surely they were shouting, their faces contorted in horror and their arms waving wildly. They didn't look like angels. They didn't appear to be demons either, though. They looked familiar. They looked like members of a railroad grading crew who were sure they'd unintentionally killed 3 innocent prospectors. Carrying ore they wanted assayed, the 3 men had settled down beside the river to eat their lunch in the warm sunshine and perhaps rest for a while. How could they have known they were sitting in the very place railroad grade workers were preparing to blast to Kingdom Come? They picked a flat spot comfortably because it had few rocks. What they had not known was that they had chosen to stop directly over a 20-foot hole packed with black powder and a fuse that had already been lit when they sat down. Luckily for them, a nearby hole had blown first, and their reflexes, honed by their own blasting adventures, had prompted them to run even before they were able to think clearly. The charges had been set carefully to remove the rock that was in the way and to leave untouched the rock intended to stay as the railroad bed. The blasters were skilled. They'd been setting charges since the railroad route extended beyond Rockwood. Sure, some of them hadn't done exactly what they should have, but none had gone this wrong because the blasters always followed the rules. They'd been certain no one was in the vicinity. They'd yelled, they'd done all they could, but those prospectors were already hard of hearing from their own years of blasting rocks, had slipped through. The prospectors had been fortunate, other men were not. Charges went wrong. Rock fell in unexpected ways. Hillsides collapsed. Fuses sputtered, detonating long-delayed blasts only after a man checking on them had come far too close. People died seeking the mineral riches of the San Juan Mountains, and many came close to dying in the monumental effort of building the railroad. In the years to come, people would perish in the train wrecks, debris flows, snowslides, floods, and other tragedies along the train route. The three prospectors gathered what they could find of their belongings and left. For this day, at least, the Animas River would not claim another soul. Well, that was a very scary experience. Terror in the snow. Sandra's saying something about a Sasquatch. That reminds me, on this railway we have up here, a lot of people saw a Bigfoot on their way up to Silverton. Just strolling along. You would think they'd know the times that the train comes through, but maybe there was something that happened that day to cause it to delay. Makes you wonder. Alrighty, this one is called Terror in the Snow. As they cross the high bridge, every D and S and GRR passenger experiences a chilling thrill looking down into the rushing waters of the Animas River directly beneath them. Just beyond the bridge, by a stretch of track that railroaders call the bowling alley, lies another kind of construction, an earthen ramp from the tracks down to the river. It was used once in 1921. People hope it will never be needed again. 4 days before Christmas in 1921, a southbound train plummeted 100 feet over the riverbank just before the bridge. Squint into the snow and it's easy to picture the scene. It had snowed heavily only 2 days earlier. The train was double-header and being pulled by two engines as it made its way toward Durango. In the first engine, there were two brothers from a railroading family who loved working together. On this day, the younger brother was the fireman shoveling coal. The other brother was the engineer. As the train neared the high bridge, holy crap, for some reason my mic keeps falling on me. Let me reposition. All right. Let's see if we can keep this where it should be. Weird. Okay, so as the train neared the high bridge, a slurry of snow and mud suddenly crashed down the mountain carrying a huge boulder. Had the vibrations of the train triggered the sudden slide, or had gravity alone sent the rocks crashing to the tracks? Whatever caused the slide, it slammed into the side of the first engine, pushing it off the tracks. The engine careened down the steep slope toward the river. The farther it slid, the more cars were pulled down after it. The first coal tender, then the second engine. Both engines and a tender landed in the river, 100 feet below the tracks. The River of Souls claimed one that day. The fireman was thrown from the first locomotive and crushed by the engine as it rolled over him, and he died instantly. The older brother jumped from the engine and landed on the rocks, breaking both of his legs. That leap saved his life, but he faced a long, painful recovery from his injuries. The crew of the second engine were thrown into the icy water and suffered relatively minor cuts, bruises, and hypothermia. Behind the two engines and their tenders, a flanger's plow blades screeched as they scraped against the tracks they were supposed to clear. Next in line, the coach with 20 screaming passengers and the baggage car were pulled off the rails. At that moment, the coupling broke. The derailed cars came to a stop, still on the grade. Had the deep snow slowed the train? Had the flanger offered just enough resistance to break the coupling, or had something else saved them? The passengers could not believe their good fortune in not being thrown into the frigid Animas River, where they surely would have drowned. Snow continued to fall as a relief train was sent to transport the passengers. An unearthen ramp was built to pull the engines out of the river and back up the tracks. Before the relief effort was finished, the snow lay 3 feet deep at the wreck site. Tragedy had struck the brothers that day, and the passengers knew how close they had come to disaster. Both locomotives were repaired and returned to service. Despite the horror of that wreck, their surviving brother went back to work for the railroad, followed by succeeding generations of his family. His younger brother's spirit lives on, not in ghostly form, but in the family's enduring love of railroading. More than 90 years later, the ramp is a visible reminder that danger can lurk around every curve in the San Juans. Railroaders approach this stretch with added caution, knowing that the mountainside has thrown rocks on the bowling alley in the past and could again. Chapter 5 is Tacoma. Yeah, I was just reading in the... I know, it was weird. I'm sitting there reading and all of a sudden my microphone comes down like right directly into the book. Push it back. A couple minutes later it comes down again. Like, what the crack, you guys? Leave me alone. Quit pestering me. Oh, geez. Okay, so I just remembered I told things they couldn't follow me from the campsite, but I don't think I said that at my sister's house. But I think it's just, I don't know. I might have to tighten some nuts on my mic stand here. I think they got loose over the summer with all the heat. It's not too cold in here tonight. I wonder if there's a cloud cover or something. Plus, I'm wearing my grandpa's jacket, so that's nice. Oh, goodness gracious. I'm glad you guys are hanging out in there. I'm having a drink of water really quick, a puff off my vape, and then we're going to get into Chapter 5, which is called Tacoma. I know of a Tacoma, Washington. I didn't know we had a Tacoma here. Yeah, that story kind of reminded me of a accident that happened at my husband's work after they jerry-rigged one of those. Basically, it's like a really giant compactor. It's a roller that's full of gravel. The weight from this roller is from gravel, and my husband was working on it earlier that day and then left work because they weren't going to do anything else until they got the correct pin or something for it. But like I said, they jerry-rigged it and then called this younger guy in. We actually went to his funeral because at some point, I think a pin broke or something, and he went over the side because he couldn't stop and jumped the wrong way. So when he jumped, the gravel basically covered and killed him. He got covered by the gravel, and then the thing rolled over him. It was pretty terrible. Rest in peace, Dustin. What a scary way to go. Also, I believe he was texting his girlfriend at the time, too. Man, that'd be so scary. So scary. All right, Tacoma. Chapter 5, Tacoma. Look closely. There are street lights in the forest. What the crack? The train had been traveling up and down the canyon for 2 decades when investors in a distant state decided there was a great opportunity along this route. The power of the Animas River could be harnessed and converted to electricity. They planned to build 3 power plants and divert the water through them. The project would require miles of wooden flumes, multiple reservoirs, and a mountain of money. At least $3 million. Could you imagine what it would be today? Workers came to build the brick and stone plant, to cut trees and fashion them into flumes, to build earthen dams, and to lay the cable that would carry electricity to Durango and Silverton. The flats across the river from the plant filled with tents and log cabins, even a rooming house. As soon as the power plant was finished, construction crews departed, leaving only the few men who ran the plant, including a foreman and his family. While Rockwood still relied on kerosene lanterns, coal stoves, and privies, Tacoma had electricity and indoor plumbing. There was a post office, a mess hall, even a schoolroom in the big house. Many years later, the house was dismantled and hauled to Durango, leaving only memories of life on the east side of the river. Tacoma has seen tragedies through the years. One foreman's motor car collided with a porcupine on the tracks and fell over the cliff, carrying the man to his death. A bulldozer operator died while replacing the wooden flume with metal pipe on the steep hill above the power plant. And a mysterious middle-of-the-night Halloween accident disabled one of the generators. Even so, Tacoma was a happy place for most of the people living there through the years. Water still courses through the plant, producing power and sending electricity out to those once envious neighbors. But on the flats, only foundation stones protrude above the ground here and there, never so many as to suggest the outline of a building. The very shape of life in Tacoma has been obscured by the passage of time. Only the streetlights still stand, eerie evidence of a modern settlement with amenities that were the envy of people passing through. They say the current to the lights has been cut off, but who's to say they don't glow when no one is around? Oh my, Mooney's gonna live this one. This one's called Crazy Woman Creek. Crazy Woman Creek. I'm scared. She could hear the train whistle from far below again. There's a thin line between fear and madness, and the woman was about to cross it. She had been marking the days since her husband left, adding scratch line after scratch line to the log wall of her wretched little cabin. It was too dark to really see them. She had to rub them with her shaking cold finger to count. Was it 15, 20? And that was just this time. How many hundreds of days had she listened to the whistle, vowing she'd ride the train to a better place? The wind howled through the spaces between the logs. It was so cold. Winter was coming again, and she remembered how awful the last winter had been. She couldn't face another. She thought she'd never be warm again. And he was gone, prospecting, looking for that pretty crystalline rock he called quartz. That's where I'll find gold and silver, he had said. But there was no gold, there was no silver. Oh, how she hated that rock. At first, she watched for him each day. He couldn't have forgotten her. He wouldn't. He promised to bring home enough gold to buy her a beautiful house in the city. Maybe Denver, looking out over the high plains, or San Francisco, with a view of the sea, or even Durango, where families lived and children grew to healthy adulthood. He'd promised. But with each day, her hopes of seeing him again dimmed, and her fear of surviving without him swelled, squeezing her heart until she could feel each frantic beat. She tried to find her way down the river to the train tracks, but there was a steep walled gorge in one direction, a treacherous series of waterfalls in the other. She might slip on the rock. She could be attacked by a bear or a mountain lion. Each time she turned back, consumed by fear. This place terrified her. Where was he? Her husband should have been back by now. How could he leave her alone up here, on this godforsaken mountain? Beautiful. That's what he called this place when they came up here, and it had been beautiful, with colorful wildflowers, vestiges of winter snow on the peaks, and that achingly blue sky. I'll make us rich, honey, you'll see. The memory of that promise cut through her now. Rich, ha! The word tasted foul as she said it. Bitter. Poisonous. The wildflowers were long gone. Snow was piling up on the mountains, covering the ground around their cabin, and the sky was gray every day, threatening more snow and cold. She knew now that she'd never have a house where she could hang wallpaper and welcome callers. There were no riches here, only misery and broken promises, isolation, and the train whistle taunting her from far below. She could hear the clatter of boulders crashing down the mountainside, the crack of a tree falling, the roar of a mountain lion, the cry of a young deer as it was overcome by a predator. The sounds would drive her mad. She had to go soon. Otherwise, she was afraid she'd never live anywhere but this godforsaken cabin in the shadowy forest of spruce and fir where the sun never penetrated. Farther below, the train passed, carrying women and children, and that's what the whistle told her. Come to me, I am your way out, your only hope. It called every day, reawakening her brightest dreams and her darkest fears. But she was trapped above, never seeing another person, never hearing another voice, just the cold wind moaning around her cabin, and sleet pelting the leather window. Before long, the creek would be frozen, and then she would have no chance left. She knew she had to go. She didn't want to die in this place. In the distance, she heard the whistle. Down the creek, she thought. It's the only way. This time I won't get lost. I won't fall in the rapids. I'm not going to drown. I can get to the train. But for her, there would be no escape. To this day, kayakers encounter her in the waterfalls and rapids that are named for her. When the crazy woman is happy, they say their boats slip right through the rapids like they're greased with joy. But when she's upset, every boulder catches them as she reaches out from underneath and tries to pull them down, down, down. On those days, they say, there's no doubt she wants to kill you. Poor crazy lady. What's up with all these dudes, taking off and leaving their old ladies for hundreds of days? I wonder what she was eating. That's so sad. Poor crazy lady. Well, on that note, you guys, we're going to go to our second musical break. On this break, we have Mystique with Rampage. We have Mocha T with My Life. Mr. Britt Casey with Main Thing. And then we have Mystique again with Time for School. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
Spark so much fire, think I woke up the dragons. I'm the new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me. Spark so much fire, think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me. You people find your well, I'm the kind that made you as I know the principles, and we feasting the beast with the dragon relief. When it happens, it show that I don't play though. Step into us will be so fatal. Spark so much fire. Think I woke up the dragons. I'm the new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me. Spark so much fire. Think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me.
Hey, it's swag. I done got back in my bag. I done had people laugh. I done seen people pass. I spaz like spaz. The garbage man and they trash. This of course I can't crash. This a race and I'm fast. I pass the fate and put all of it last. Dragon so I clash. I hide it all in the stash. We are diamonds, they are brass. I'm connected with no lag. She a spin 30 for a bag. That's my wife and I'm glad. Michael Myers with his stabs. Ali with his jabs. A scientist in the lab. JJ Watt in his past. The amigos with the dab. This is why I ride. And I got the nag. Spazzy rolled a sack with Mystique in the back. Money tall like Shaq. Weapons like Iraq. I am cancer in a pack. The 9/11 attack. We don't know no slag. You can't hold us back. Rock and roll with that.
So much fire. Think I woke up the dragons. I'm the new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me. Spark so much fire. Think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me.
Life, the quality or state of being alive, a living organism, and I am. Mocha tea, let's get it. My life, the sugar, honey, iced tea. They wonder why I smile so gracefully, and wonder why I like blue when I'm lactose. 10 toes, 10 fingers, nigga, 10 hoes. Flow dope, whip it, microwave and stove was broke. Broke days, broke weeks, even broke months. A rich don't have them going crazy. Lettuce and mac and cheese got them going crazy. Irregular, abnormal, and unusual. So unusual, I got shot for being beautiful. You can tell me love, you so gorgeous, but yet got a gun pointing to my forehead. Yo, head break bread, yeah, we gon' feast. Remember the cold nights we had nothing to eat. Southern Belle raising hell area near you. I'm hungry and leaving no proof. My life, my life, my life. It ain't always sunshine in my life. A big puzzle, I'm trying to figure peace ain't right. They thought I wasn't gonna make it, I know they didn't. It's visual, check your vision if you got the issue. A news feed if you got the memo. Breaking news, a new wave coming. Fuck a wave, hurricane, so mocha-licious. I really do this, it's in my blood. Pass it to my kids when I have some. And that's hip-hop.
like it when you pop it, drop it, swing. Nah, don't stop it, doing that thing. Go, go, girl, keep doing that thing. I just wanna make you my main thing. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Vanilla chocolate flavored, you're the only one that I'm searching for. You the one for me and I can't complain. You sunshine anytime it rain. Not around then I might go insane. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Honey, you so sweet, I can't ignore. Thinking about you both more and more. Making it pop and drop and swing. I could be the king and you my queen. Yeah, you look good, but you I'm saying. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Who's them dudes in the back with the black on? Crew deep, don't sleep or slack on. Come to the money, honey, I'ma get a stack on. Excuse me, ma, can I get my Mac on? To the left, throw it to the right. Do it like you wanna do it to me all night. From the block, kid know how to act hard. Like brick house, women with a fat backyard. In the club with me and my man's illin' that. In the back door with me and my man chillin' that. I'm on the floor, I'm like, damn, she killin' that. It's going down, no cop around, feelin' that. I'm fly, I'm a guy that'll get him. Player like me, need two of you with him. Call you a lollipop and I wanna lick up you. Number one, my top choice of pick. Come on, give it to me, ma. Go, go, girl. Now don't stop. Oh, no, girl. Break it down for me. Get it gone. Can you keep it going? On and on and on. Now give it to me, ma. Go, go, girl. Now don't stop. Oh, no, girl. Hey, break it down for me. Get it gone. Cause you got it going on and on and on. Can't deny, boo, that you too fly. Anytime that I look you in the eye, a phenomenon that I can't explain. Like the things you're doing to my brain. You don't only wanna take away my pain. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Can't stop thinking about how you move and all the things that I'ma do to you. True, this might be a little bit strange. Don't care if I don't even know your name. That's why I wanna tell you this simple and plain. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Who's them chicks all thick with the pumps on? Lumps in the front, back with the bumps on. Not a cat hoping that he get his humps on. I'm way beyond with them other chumps on. Sweet enough to eat and he might bite you. Wanna make love to you, I don't wanna fight you. Not a body like you, not a one like you. When you come around, no telling what he might do. Right now in the club, who the dawn? Don't a man that got it going on later on. I could tell by the dancing, you digging this song. You can tell I've been digging you all night long. And I love to be digging in you all night long. Party right here, hottie all night long. Let's flex it to the coat check, exit to the Lexus, Nexus, triple exit. Come on, give it to me, ma. Go, go, girl. Now don't stop. Oh, no, girl. Break it down for me. Get it gone. Can you keep it going? On and on and on. Now give it to me, ma. Go, go, girl. Now don't stop. Oh, no, girl. Hey, break it down for me. Get it gone. Cause you got it going on and on and on. I like it when you pop it, drop it, swing. Now don't stop it, doing that thing. Go, go, girl, keep doing that thing. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop it, drop it, swing. Now don't stop it, doing that thing. Go, go, girl, keep doing that thing. I just wanna make you my main thing. Vanilla chocolate flavored, you're the only one that I'm searching for. You the one for me and I can't complain. You sunshine anytime it rain. Not around then I might go insane. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Honey, you so sweet, I can't ignore. Thinking about you both more and more. Making it pop and drop and swing. I could be the king and you my queen. Yeah, they look good, but you I'm saying. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Can't deny, boo, that you too fly. Anytime that I look you in the eye, a phenomenon that I can't explain. Like the things you're doing to my brain. You don't only wanna take away my pain. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Can't stop thinking about how you move and all the things that I'ma do to you. True, this might be a little bit strange. Don't care if I don't even know your name. That's why I wanna tell you this simple and plain. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You gotta love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? Get ready. It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You got to love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
be strong. I am a teacher, it's how I define myself. Help me vibe so well, don't stress, do your best and forget the rest. Mama made sure we prayed to God, highly blessed, and I am honored. No weapon formed against us should prosper, don't ever forget. And I bet when you enter into school, you'll feel ultimate, no consequences of your accomplishments. Move away from the negativity, it got you bit. And if you getting in the midst, just take the time and repent. Stay focused, get a pencil, write about the lesson. Raise your righteous hand, find the answer to questions. Could be your main plan, leave a saucy impression. You are your own fan, you got this, is what I recommend. Do you believe? Do you believe? Are you ready? Are you ready? It's time for school, roll out your red carpet. You gotta love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You got to love to learn and have fun. It's time for school. Back then, I loved school. I was cool. I was putting in my dues. I ain't wanna be no fool. Mama had it poppin', school supplies and shopping. Success was an option. Math had me locked in, but English was my topic. Lunchtime, I had it rocking. Lunch tables was knocking, and we wasn't stopping. In gym, I was good from the 3. Like Stockton, music class, I had everyone stuck. They was watching. We wore bow straps with retros and the watches. Love life, humble yourself. That's my creed. Think with your mind and heart, you will achieve. Pray on it, give it to God and proceed. Your goals, ambition, and God is all you need. Imagination and will is something we can't teach. Remember Dr. King, he had a whole dream. You can do whatever you want. I believe.
Do you believe? Do you believe? Are you ready? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You gotta love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You got to love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out the red carpet. Yeah, you gotta learn to love to have fun. It's time for school. Roll out the red carpet. Yeah.
I'm talking over here on a muted mic. Bah humbug. Welcome back, you guys. Thanks so much for listening tonight to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I was just saying we were supposed to have Roots and Wings Paranormal on tonight, but due to illness, they weren't able to make it. Also, there was a loss for one of their teammates. I think it was a 12-year-old boy, had an accident with a gun. So thoughts and prayers to those guys to feel better soon and to, have not too bad of a rough ride with the healing of losing a child. I've lost my parents and so many friends and family and such, but I cannot imagine. So thoughts and prayers, love and light to you guys, and I can't wait for the 21st of next month when we have you back on. Alrighty then. So now we are at chapter 6, and it says Cascade /Theft. And on each of these pages, on each of these chapters, if you do end up getting this book, because the pictures and everything are amazing, it's well crafted, but on these pages that tell you about the area, it shows a little map. So I'm wondering, because some of these towns are not towns anymore, they're just basically neighborhoods. If you put these certain sites in on maps, maybe other people have visited. And so you can find your way there too if you ever come to visit the Four Corners area of Colorado. It's beautiful. You have deserts, mountains, plateaus, mesas, plains, so many different things here. All right, so look through the trees beyond the water-worn boulders. Can you see the rusty equipment? The shattered remains of railroad cars, the fruit trees, the ruins of a shack. This was where the wagon trail met the river, where a silver-mined tramway hauled ore from tunnel to trail, where a ball mill ground that ore down to fine fragments, where trees were cut down and sliced into railroad ties. For a brief time before the train came, it was called Nicora and had a post office as well as plans for a hotel. Later, it became Teft, a center of mining, logging, and milling along the river. The shelf of land between the Animas and the mountain was peppered with cabins. At one point, housing was so limited that 2 railroad cars were brought in. Occupants later dug out finished a basement under one of them. A railroad siding brought trains right into the heart of the settlement to a loadout made of massive trees. Later, a trapper moved into one of the cabins and planted those fruit trees. Traces of his garden remain, although nothing edible grows in it now. There's a more recent cabin as well, if you consider something more than 70 years old recent. Is it any wonder that people who spend time here see figures floating among the trees or hear knocking on the cabin wall in the middle of the night? So this first story is called Raging Waters. Twisted rails are a harsh reminder that within the river's beauty lies the potential for destruction. The interrupted lives are harder to see. There are stories, certainly, the little boy who fell from his horse and drowned, his father who drowned a few years later. The river has claimed countless others as well. Countless. When the Animas swells with spring runoff or summer monsoons, it greedily takes whatever and whoever is unfortunate enough to be beside it, on it, or in it. The river of souls becomes possessed. It has a destination, and anything in its path will be taken along. Bridges, houses, railroad tracks, orchards, herds of livestock, even people. Nothing can stop it. When it started raining in early October 1911, people complained. Enough, they said. We had all the rain we need. But of course, the clouds and the river paid no heed to their complaints. It wasn't much at first, just a light drizzle. As the day wore on, the storm grew stronger, the raindrops more abundant, and they pounded on rooftops and drove people indoors. Each drop made its inexorable way to the Animas. By that night, the river was rolling. It chewed at the steep banks lining its path, prying rocks and boulders loose. The soil could not resist its relentless tug. Soon the river was a brown mass of water and debris. For a while, the Denver and Rio Grande tracks withstood the rush. But gradually, the rock and soil roadbed gave way. Tracks and ties were pulled into the swelling stream and carried away. By the time the river spilled out into the Animas Valley the next day, the flood was an epic catastrophe. The call went out, get to high ground. It's a matter of life and death. Those who heeded the warning lived to tell the story of that day. Those who didn't perished. The rampaging river pulled bridges apart, It ate away at underpinnings of farmhouses and barns. It plucked fruit trees from the soil like daisies in a field. As if the roar of the river wasn't enough, the descending tide carried with it a cacophony of struggle, fear, and surrender. The livestock, cows, horses, sheep, and goats that grazed on autumn's last blades of grass never stood a chance. Chickens in their coops were swept into the melee. Perhaps a stranger passing through was caught as well. The flood filled the valley, reaching cliff to cliff. Homes and thriving farms drowned in the vast lake. By the evening, the water reached Animas City, where the river squeezed into narrow channels, rising higher and higher. Rocks, trees, mattresses, and furniture churned with animal corpses and hay bales, colliding with everything in their path. They crashed against bridges, ripping them from their footings. In Durango, workers hurriedly moved 2 loaded coal cars onto the railroad bridge, hoping the extra weight would keep the structure in place. Spinning and tumbling its way south, a twisted mass of steel and debris hit the railroad bridge. One span broke loose and, carrying its coal car, careened down the river. The rest of the bridge held its ground with the coal car in place. The raging torrent left only one bridge intact in all of La Plata County. No one knows who might have been standing on the others or too close to the banks when the flood hit. How many souls the river claimed would remain a mystery. The deluge pushed on into New Mexico, joined along the way by equally swollen rivers from the east and west. It would be, by far, the biggest flood ever witnessed in southwest Colorado. When the rain stopped and the floodwaters subsided, young Warren Prosser was sent out to survey damage to the railroad tracks. He hung from rock walls and jumped from cliff to cliff as he worked his way through the canyon. He reported that almost half the 45-mile length of the Silverton branch was destroyed. Throughout the region, the flood damaged or destroyed more than 400 miles of track. In many places, the entire roadbed had to be rebuilt. All along its path, homes, businesses, and settlements had been obliterated. The last remaining post office in the canyon would survive only 1 more year. The abandoned buildings would be erased by another flood 16 years later. The railroad did not surrender. What had been built once could be rebuilt. There were trees to be cut and milled into ties, not just for the Denver and Rio Grande, but for the other railroads around Silverton. The pathfinder of the San Juans was enlisted to spearhead the effort. Otto Mears was a Russian immigrant who had come to the United States as an orphan child and eventually found his way to Colorado. He built irrigation ditches and telephone lines, roads and railroads, and he knew what he had done. Mears quickly set up a sawmill down the canyon where Cascade Creek flows into the Animas. The place became known as Teft. Most of the trees close to the railroad route had been cut for the original railroad line and construction following previous floods, but high up Cascade Creek and one of its tributaries, Lime Creek, were tall conifers. All they had to do was float them down the rugged, rock-strewn creeks of his mill, cut them, and get them to where they needed to be. Until the train could reach the mill, they would rely on pack trains and wagons to haul ties. A community grew around the mill. Mears brought in the boiler from an old locomotive to power the mill and 2 rail cars to house workers. In a little more than 6 weeks, with 300 men working, the line was repaired and train service restored. The mill remained in operation long after those repairs were completed. There was always a need for ties, and more floods would only add to the demand. Cutting trees and floating them down the creeks was hazardous work. Domenico Mativi had followed his brothers from their native Tyrol to Silverton to work in the mines. they were no strangers to tragedy. One brother had been electrocuted in a freak accident, 2 had died in the 1918 flu epidemic, and another succumbed to pneumonia. In 1925, 27-year-old Domenico was cutting trees by Lime Creek. He and the other timber fellers cut off the branches and pushed the trees into the water. They had to ride the logs down the creek to keep them from getting caught in the rocks. Although it was almost summer, the water was icy cold from melting snow. The young Italian was balancing on a log in the swift-flowing creek when he lost his footing. Trying to keep their own balance on logs, the other men watched Domenico's body slam against rocks as he flailed and kicked in a valiant but fruitless effort to save himself. His head hit a rock and his body went limp. It all happened so quickly. Before they could reach him, the swift current carried Domenico downstream to his death. All the others could do was say a prayer for the young man, thank God it hadn't been them, and return to work. They hoped they would be able to retrieve his body when it snagged on debris downstream. They knew that sometimes what the river took could not be found. This story is called The Missing Son. William Lonergan had never amounted to much. His best friend was the bottle, and his worst enemy was work. Still, his mother loved her Willie. Drunk or not, he kept her company and made her little house a bit less lonely. Willie's mom had endured a hard life. Mary Ann was a mere girl when she left Ireland to come to America. She lived with her sister, who married a fellow named Lonergan. Sometime later, the 3 of them made their way to Silverton. Mary Ann was grown up by then. It was time for them to find her a husband and move out. Y'all don't need a husband. Come on, you could do this on your own. You could do bad by yourself. You don't need no man. They didn't have to look far. Maurice, a.k.a. Uncle Daddy, Lonergan was a small, feisty saloon keeper, known to most of his customers as the Dublin Rooster. He happened to be the brother-in-law of Mary Ann's sister, so what if he was almost twice her age, with a red beard that reached all the way to the floor? Ew. She couldn't be choosy. The 2 were married, and a year later, William was born. The marriage didn't last. Uncle Daddy went to live with his sister, and Mary Ann was left to raise her son on her own. They struggled to get by, but at least she knew Willie wouldn't leave her. It was a lot harder for folks in Silverton to appreciate the man they all knew as Black Willie, because of his dark moods when he drank too much. To them, he was just a good-for-nothing drunk. People like him ought to be sent packing, they said. Let some other town deal with him. And that's just what happened on a bitterly cold February day in 1922. Whatever occurred that day, it was the last straw for the town marshal. 36-year-old Willie Lonergan had to leave town now. Never mind that it was 37 degrees below zero. Never mind that Willie had neither coat nor overshoes. The marshal escorted the hapless drunk to the edge of town and told him to head down the tracks. Dressed only in a serge suit and Oxfords, Willie did as he was told. Better prepared men had perished trying to walk down the Animas Canyon. Sober men had died. Willie was neither prepared nor sober when he was run out of Silverton on a rail. Weeks went by without any word of him. Despairing of ever seeing him again, his mother published an appeal in the newspaper. Should any reader know of the whereabouts of Willie Lonergan, they will do me a favor to let me know when and where he was seen by them. He has been away from home several weeks. Willie had vanished. Had he been swept away by an avalanche, attacked by a mountain lion, or simply frozen to death? Mary Ann died without ever knowing. And yet, a strange report came. Up from the canyon, a small abandoned building near the... Oh, this page stuck together. There we go. Got it. Near the railroad tracks had burned to the ground. It was almost 18 miles from Silverton, beyond all the snow slides. After the ashes cooled, people searched through the remains. There, amidst the charred wood, lay a man's burned torso. Around it, they found bits of metal, perhaps from his clothing. There was something else in the ashes, too. A pair of Oxfords. Could Willie have come so far, only to die trying to keep and get warm? Poor Willie. A torso and your Oxfords. You'd think like a skull or something? Oxfords? Seriously? Well, I guess that helped them to think that that was Mr. Willie. Little pause for the cause as I take a rip from my vape and a little cache of water real quick. It's good to see you guys in the chat, and I hope, even if you're not in chat, that you guys are having a good weekend. Hope you're taking care of yourselves. Water, sweet nectar of life. It's so good. Okay, so this is chapter 7, and this is talking about an area called Bowen's Ranch, also known as Bitterroot. The spirits in Bitterroot may have come from nowhere else. The big house here, the most recently inhabited building, with its history and memories, didn't always belong here. Early in the history of the railroad, crews who were responsible for 6 miles of track and bridges lived in section houses that stood 6 miles apart. There was one at Rockwood, another at Cascade, and a third at Needleton. Oh my. Hold on one second. Okay, Needleton. There likely were other temporary ones along the route, but these 3 had permanent crews assigned to them. By the time Oscar Schaaf bought this land and the nearby mine in the 1930s, old section houses stood empty, so he had the buildings from Cascade hauled upstream 2 miles by train to his property. Any resident spirits may have come along. At Bitterroot, perhaps more than anywhere else between Rockwood and Silverton, it's easy to see how people once lived, because the buildings, though old, have been kept up very well. Paint, curtain, beds, shoes, and silk stockings, a cook stove, a garden rake, a children's swing, ordinary possessions give testimony. They tell stories of the Schaaf family's long history up and down the river, from mining claims at Teft to permanent homes in Durango. They give hints of the section hands at Cascade and the men whose work was on the trains instead of on the rails. They offer glimpses of the travelers and prospectors and miners, even the hikers and hunters who pass through here. They weave tales of longing for a different mountain range or a different language, or perhaps for springtime after a long winter. But many years before the Schaafs developed it, there was another settlement in this area. Its name implies agriculture, but its purpose was hospitality in the broadest sense. The wagon road passed by Bowen's Ranch and then the railroad. Miners and prospectors frequented this boarding house and saloon, as did travelers on their way to and from Silverton. The voices of Bowen's Ranch, Bitterroot, and even Cascade tell us that not all the fascinating history along the Animus happened before the turn of the 20th century. It's happening still. They speak more loudly than most, but only those who will stop and listen. So this one's called The Woman in the Woods. In the forest across from Cascade Creek, a solitary woman moved quietly among the trees. Clad in a long, full-skirted dress, she seemed to float above the ground, almost transparent. The man had just hiked 4 miles, threading his way down the narrow, dark Cascade Canyon. As he reached the Animas River, sunlight illuminated the broad bench of land, deepening the shadows within the forest. He saw something move on the other side of the river. He stared intently at the trees. Yes, there she was again, young, with long dark hair, but she wasn't dressed like any hiker he'd ever seen. He called out to the figure. In the blink of an eye, she was gone. The hiker crossed the bridge, squinting into the dark, sunless glade. He called softly, "Where are you? Do you need help?" No one answered. The only sound he could hear was the sigh of the wind. Could that have been a ghost, he thought? Whatever it was, she was gone. When he got back to Durango, he asked around. He learned that there had been a mine and a sawmill near the creek. Years later, an old trapper had lived in one of the abandoned cabins, but a woman in a long dress? People just shook their heads, not likely there, now or in the past. Now up the river a couple miles, that's a different story, some suggested. There was a place called Bowen's Ranch, one friend explained. I hear there were women living there. Nothing is left of Bowen's Ranch. No buildings, no foundations, no markers or trees or abandoned tools. Decades later, other people came to try their hands at mining silver. Oh, thank you. I just got some delicious looking dinner. Okay, I was at silver. Where the crack did it go? I don't even see it. Hold on. I'm going to text Kinsey really quick. Can you please bring the dogs in? Jeez, oh Pete. I just told them this last night and repeatedly before that. Do not put the dogs in the backyard when I'm doing my show. Jeez, oh Pete. I'm going to try Gabe because Vern never gets his messages from me. All right. Okay, so holy crap. This is not cool. Okay, so decades later, other people came to try their hands at mining silver. All the buildings there now were moved here or built on site. Yet there's something strange, something reminiscent of the first settlement that stood here. There are the voices, soft, sad, desperate. And there are shoes, one that appear totally out of place. In its heyday, Bowen's Ranch was a popular stopping point along the Animas Toll Road. Bill Bowen's store carried important staples and supplies for travelers and prospectors. When construction started on the railroad grade and tracks to Silverton, business really picked up. He added a rooming house and a saloon. Bowen called it a store boarding house, but his other business ventures suggest more. Bill and his wife, Jane, operated the rambunctious Westminster Hall in Silverton, the town's very first saloon. And Jane, she was Silverton's first madam. The understanding town fathers might have disapproved of such activities, but business was good. It was very good. Out here at his ranch with no competition, business could be even better. Bill knew just how to cheer up lonely railroad construction workers, prospectors, and road-weary travelers. Liquor, gambling, dancing, and women, that's what they needed. For the women of Bowen's Ranch, their only choice had been between starving and selling their bodies. Now they were trapped here deep in the mountains and in debt to the proprietor. There had been one way in and no way out. Things got worse when Bowen bought in a partner. He had used John Haley's services as an accountant in Silverton. Now he wanted him to take care of business records and inventory at the ranch. Within weeks, the partnership had soured. Business was brisk with a steady stream of railroad construction workers, but the books didn't reflect that. John wasn't tracking the saloon's inventory, he was consuming it, and the more he drank, the more aggressive he became. Disagreements became arguments, then turned into fisticuffs. Bowen grew certain that John was stealing from him as well. "You're done here, John. Clear out, you and your misuse," he told the saloon keeper in disgust. They wouldn't leave. It came to a head on a fall day in 1881 when the store and saloon were crowded with customers. John had vowed to find a gun, so when he barged into the store with his hand in his pocket, Bill presumed the worst. John cursed and fumed as he moved toward his former partner. Fearing for his life, Bill raised his revolver and fired. John was hit but kept coming. Bill fired a second time and a third. John fell to the floor dead, but from behind him came his wife, wielding a butcher knife and determined to avenge her husband. Customers surrounded and subdued her before she could reach her intended victim. Bill resolutely stepped over his former friend's body and walked out the door. He didn't stop until he reached Durango and turned himself in. Yet if Bill was so innocent, why did all the witnesses flee the place before he returned with the sheriff? No one stayed around to vouch for him. Only one person remained to answer the sheriff's questions, and that was the victim's wife. Oh my goodness gracious. Let me call these people real quick. This is ridiculous. Oh shit, I don't want to FaceTime you. Waiting for the ring. Ring, ring. Come on, phone. What is up? Oh my. There it goes. Hey, can you bring the dogs in? Because they're barking and causing chaos. Thank you. Thank you. Love you. Bye. All right. Perhaps the sporting woman saw the shooting as a sign. If they left right now, they might get away without having to settle any debts or obligations with Bill Bowen. Or perhaps they were frightened by what they saw and by having to tell the truth when questioned by the sheriff. If they were to leave, where could they go? Certainly not Durango. Bowen was on his way there, and not Silverton, where his wife would track them down and force them to come back. Their only hope lay in the small settlements along the river, where they might find a sympathetic soul who would help them get away. No one knows what became of those poor hapless women that day, or any of the days that followed. The fates of such fallen women were rarely recorded unless they ended their lives by drinking carbolic acid or lived to an old age in the towns where they had made a living. Fleeing a house of ill repute was not newsworthy, even if the owner had just killed an employee. Remember Kate Johnson from the railroad? That's what it was. I thought it was muriatic acid, carbolic acid, that she took. Could one of the women have reached Cascade, only to have her escape halted there? Whoever the hiker saw in the woods, she did not want to stop when he called to her. She fled into the dark woods, where she may be to this day, trapped into the wilderness she so desperately wanted to escape. Ooh, this one is called Hot Sauce in the Caliente. The bottle slid off the counter, hovered in midair, then plummeted, shattering the glass and splashing hot sauce on the floor, the counter, everywhere. "Would you stop that?" the woman shouted to an empty car. Hospitality can be a challenge on the Durango and Silverton, particularly when troublemaking spirits get involved. There had been a steady stream of passengers in the 212 concession car all day. There were drinks to mix, cups to refill, and bags of popcorn and candy bars to sell. People stumbled through the car, trying to stay on their feet as the train lurched and jerked. They bumped into one another, grabbing strangers' arms to steady themselves. It was all part of the adventure of traveling on a narrow-gauge train. The concession car worker was used to the pitching and heaving. She had learned long ago how to pour a drink without spilling, even in the roughest parts of the ride to Silverton and back. But today was different. Things had been slipping and sliding around the car ever since it left the depot. The napkin holder that rarely slid off the counter refused to stay on it today. If she set anything down, it moved. Finally, there was a lull in business. She had a chance to get things put away before the train reached Silverton. That's when the Tabasco sauce took off. She'd seen the bottle slide off the counter countless times. It didn't break. It just bounced and came to rest. This time, it hung in the air for what felt like a minute. Her heart skipped a beat. This was eerie and annoying. Then it flew to the floor as if flung with great force. She yelled in exasperation. It worked. After that, things stayed where they were supposed to be. She laughed when she realized she was cleaning hot sauce off the floor of a car that was first known as the Caliente, Spanish for hot. But she had no idea what might have occurred in the long existence of this car that could explain what had just happened. It was an old car built in 1879 and had undergone a number of transformations through the years. It had been a movie, Ticket to Tomahawk. True, there was some excitement over Marilyn Monroe playing a dance hall girl in the film, but nothing out of the ordinary had taken place. The 2012 had been a concession car for 30 years, and nothing unusual had happened to it in all that time, at least nothing that could account for it being haunted. But this wasn't the first time she experienced strange things in this particular car. There was the time when she was getting ready to leave after all the passengers had departed. She glanced up and saw a man passing by the window, at eye level with her. She didn't recognize him and wondered for a moment who he was. Then it dawned on her. The man would have to be 10 feet tall to look her in the eyes from outside the car. She froze. Was it a reflection of someone behind her? She hadn't heard either door open. There hadn't been any footsteps, no friendly greeting. If someone was in the car, he had to be up to no good. She whirled around. No one was there. She checked outside, looked up and down the platform. No one, 10 feet tall or otherwise. The idea of having ghosts on the train hadn't scared her. Maybe if it were at night, with no one else around, she might have been afraid. But then she knew whoever or whatever the ghost was, he had been helpful to her once. She had just hoisted the second coffee urn and headed up the narrow hallway of the Cinco Animas on her way back to the 212 when she realized she had forgotten to open the door. Rats, she thought, realizing she would have to put down the urns. Open the door, go through, put them down again, and reach back to close the door. Just as she reached the door, it swung open. Maybe it wasn't latched properly, she thought, grateful for her good fortune. She walked through, prepared to put down the urns, and the door closed behind her. What? How? She thought, with a mixture of appreciation and apprehension. Now, as she wiped up hot sauce, she was more amused than frightened. At least he's helpful once in a while, she thought. Just to be sure, she called out, "Don't do it again. I do not appreciate this mess." This one's called The Great Escape. Don't jump from the moving train. The warning is familiar to anyone who has spent time on trains. Movie stuntmen may make it look easy, but it's dangerous. Stories abound of people who jumped only to stumble and fall beneath the wheels. Horrific injuries and death are sure to result. Or maybe not. At least one man on his way to jail did jump, then disappeared into the mountains, never to be seen or heard from again. In November 1901, a call was received in Silverton. A man had been caught in Durango. The prisoner, known only as Stevenson, would be returned to the scene of the crime on the train, accompanied by Sheriff Ben Ogle. The two boarded a passenger bound for Silverton on a Thursday evening. It was an uneventful trip until the train was about 15 miles outside of Silverton, approaching Needleton. The prisoner had to relieve himself or go to the closet, as news accounts reported it. Now, any narrow-gauge passenger knows that restrooms in the coaches are tiny, less than 4 feet wide and half as deep to be exact. Certainly not big enough for more than one person at a time. There was more than an hour left in the trip. The sheriff couldn't tell him to wait, although, with hindsight, he probably wished that he had. So Ogle led Stevenson to the restroom at the back of the coach. The prisoner went inside and closed the door. The sheriff waited. The saddle thief certainly must have needed the restroom. He was staying in there a long time. Finally, Ogle couldn't wait any longer. He went to the door and called out, "You've been in there long enough, Stevenson. Come on out." There was no answer from the other side of the door. "Come out now, or I'll have to break down the door," Ogle warned. Still no answer. The sheriff forced the door open. The restroom was empty. A stiff breeze chilled his face. The small window was open. How could that be? Stevenson must have squeezed through the window and somehow managed to jump from a fast-moving train. The brakes were pulled. The train screeched to a stop. Ogle and the crew searched up and down the tracks and in the nearby woods. Nothing. The canyon was lined by steep mountains on both sides. The only way out was up and over, the arduous hike for anyone, especially in the dark and snow. And yet no trace of Stevenson was ever found. The man had managed to fit through a tiny window and, while clinging to the side of the moving train, fling himself free, all without injuring himself. Was he able to escape through the mountains that night? Or is his spirit trapped there in the steep San Juans, fated to search endlessly for a way out? Oh, this one's about Needleton. So this chapter 8, Needleton. Needleton has always been a dark place. The Needleton Mountains block the sunshine from the east, and the sun sets far too quickly behind the West Needle Range. The north wind howls down the shadowy course of the river, especially in winter when snow lies deep and oh so silent. But for a long time, Needleton prospered. First the narrow, hidden trails, then the wagon road, and finally the railroad led many people to this broad bench as they passed along the wild route to the Silverton mining district. Explorers and prospectors, miners and timber fellers, shop owners and saloon keepers, station agents, lawmen, preachers, and all the other men it takes to build a mountain town passed through Needleton. Some of the men brought women with their civilizing influence, and some of the women had children. A small number stopped and stayed. They built houses, they made friends, they pushed back the wilderness and made a home here. They loved their small enclave in the San Juans. They loved the sharp pinnacles of the skyline and never-ending rush of the river from its headwaters to the valleys far downstream. They loved the opportunity and the dream. Some might have wanted to leave, but never had the chance. Now they can't. The animus has been determined to wipe out every trace of Needleton. A flood in 1927 scoured their homes and graves from the bottomlands and deposited them somewhere. But where? Other torrents have destroyed bridges across the river. The railroad tracks have been realigned, the Needleton water tank and siding relocated. A few telegraph poles still stand, disconnected from the outside world. Where do ghosts go when every shred of home has been obliterated? Are they as lost as the place they once lived? Have they orphaned, ironically, by the river of souls, doomed to wander, searching for a place that has no more? I think I hear a cotton-picking dog out there. Man, nobody watches their fur babies. Okay, let me... Oh, man. I think... Hold on one second. I'm just going to talk and text. I think your dog's in my room. Could you go look real quick, please? Thank you. Alrighty then. Desperate measures. They called it a blockade. People in Silverton knew the word and knew what it meant for them. If they didn't starve, they would freeze to death. They needed food for their livestock as well as themselves. Packers had to feed their animals even if there was no ore to haul. Winters were bitterly cold and without coal. How would they heat their homes and businesses? It was inevitable, and I'm looking at the time and I'm like, holy shnikes, I think we got time for this. When the snow slides ran and food and coal ran short, people got irritable, impulsive, scared. The longer a blockade went on, the more perilous the situation became. Only the horses, mules, and dogs could save them, but they had to be fed as well. So when the snow kept falling week after week in the winter of 1884, Silvertonians knew they had to do something. Avalanches buried the train tracks, and as fast as one slide was cleared, another two ran. Oh no. Okay, it was caught by something. My phone just tried to off itself. By March 3rd, hundreds of men working with shovels had cleared the tracks up the canyon as far as Needleton, 15 miles below Silverton. The train had brought 3 carloads of food and another 2 cars loaded with grain and hay for livestock. But deep slides prevented the train from getting any closer. There was only one option. The people of Silverton would have to organize a massive pack train using the best snow horses and mules available. With a string of 52 animals, they set out from Silverton before dawn, supplied with only bread and whiskey for sustenance. They followed the tracks, and when they could find them in the deep snow, and at each slide, had to carefully work their way around the hardened snow and debris, sometimes around the bottom and other times up and over the top. By sundown, they had made it less than a quarter of the way. They pressed on far into the night. It was approaching midnight when they reached the Snowden slide, the last one before Middleton. As they looked into the darkness for a way over or around it, they saw a light that seemed to be on the treetops. What or who could that be? Then they heard a voice. It was a man from the section house signaling them to climb up and cross above the slide. Railroad workers had shoveled a trail for them. The trip from Silverton had taken a little over 18 hours. As they entered the section house, they were hit with a blast of warm air. A fire blazed in the big cook stove, and on the table sat a plate piled 3 feet high with beefsteaks. The weary men feasted on the first beef they had eaten in weeks. While the men rested for a few hours, the railroad workers fed the animals and began loading the packs. It took 5 animals to carry the beef. The other 47 carried hogs, sugar, canned goods, hay, grain, and other supplies. Every animal carried a load. The men would have to walk the 15 miles back to Silverton. When the first hint of daylight illuminated the mountaintops, it was time to leave. The men and the animals made their way back to Silverton through deep snow. 7 feet on the level, and no one knew how deep on the slopes. A cheering crowd of men, women, and children greeted them as they finally reached the town. In the month that followed, the men and pack animals made 11 more trips to Needleton, going down one day and returning with food and supplies the next. On one trip, a man and 2 mules were swept off the trail by a snowslide. They were partially buried, encased in hard snow that made it impossible to move. Rescuers had to dig them out. Eventually, the slides between Needleton and Silverton were cleared. The cut-through in Snowden slide was 84 feet deep. What the crack? That's insane. The train finally made it through to Silverton, and the blockade ended. The town had been cut off for 77 days. Over the years that followed, shorter blockades became almost routine. Then came the winter of 1932. Snowslides blocked the train route to Silverton for 90 days. Rail service to the mountain town was not restored until May. Holy shnikes. That's insane. You can have it. I ain't living there. This one's called The Only Way Out. Blood. So much blood. Where was Theo? Frances Hayes was doing all she could to staunch the bleeding and keep Lucette Scotch's soul in her body, but how much blood could only one woman possibly have? How much could she survive losing? Frances saw the answer on her sister Eliza's face. Not this much. Both women knew that Lucette didn't want to survive. She left the room for only a moment. Where had she said she was going? Frances didn't remember. Maybe the outhouse or something about dinner? They'd known she was despondent. That's why they'd come to visit. But they hadn't expected this. Lucette was a fine European lady, kind and genteel, and proper to a fault. How could she have pressed a gun to her stomach and pulled the trigger? Where was Theo? Probably off working somewhere. The man was always working. One of Lucette's Needle Mountain house boarders was fetching the doctor from Silverton, but the sisters knew that would take hours at best. The January snow was deep, and the train had already gone through. The pile of bloody clothes beside Lucette grew. First the towels, then the bedding, and now the tablecloth from the dining room. Theo would be furious, and Lucette would have to work for days bleaching all these linens if she survived. Press down, Frances pleaded. We have to help her. Theo never had been much help to his wife. He was tough, strong, determined. Lucette had admired those qualities when she married him. He had been in the San Juans for years and knew his way around. For most of those years, he had run pack strings over the mountains. He even hauled the first printing press into Silverton. Then he decided he had enough of town life. He wanted to live on the river down the canyon. They could build a nice hotel right by the rail to a promising mining district, he said. Miners needed a place to stay, and a store to buy supplies, and a post office. Lucette had never felt at home in this dark place with the river roaring nearby and winter winds shrieking down the canyon. She begged Theo to take her to Durango or Silverton. The answer was always the same. No, there is too much work to be done here. Theo had agreed to a trip back to Switzerland in 1884, and when they returned, they brought Lucette's mother. Her loneliness eased, but after only a year, her mother grew ill. Lucette spent long hours beside her bed, crying and begging and praying. Please, please, Theo, can't we take her to Durango? Surely a doctor there could help. But Miss Frey was too sick to travel anywhere, and in 1895 she died. Theo and Lucette buried her at Needleton. After that, Lucette was more lonely than ever. In the struggle to earn a living, Theo had no patience for his wife's romantic notions or her tearful requests for what he believed were the necessities of a civilized life. With each quarrel, he grew more obstinate. She had grown certain that her thoughts and feelings did not matter to him at all. She couldn't talk to the people who stopped at Needleton or Needle Mountain House either. The prospectors and miners seeking their fortunes in the Chicago Basin weren't interested in what she had to say. All they could talk about were essays and strikes. They knew nothing of fashion and fabric and fillings. Lucette had lost all hope, so she'd written to Frances and Eliza, telling them how lonely and melancholy she was, and they had come. Where was Theo? Frances and Eliza were certain their friend would die and feared that what her husband would say. When he burst into the room, his face was even more terrible than they had imagined. Lucette, he howled. He dropped to his knees and gathered her in his arms, wiping furiously at his eyes. There was nothing to be done. Her moans stilled, her blood ceased to flow. Lucette Scott's spirit rose from her body. Rest in peace, Lucy, whispered Frances. Surely a woman so troubled in this life, would find solace in the next. There would be no more rest and no peace for Theo. The stain of her blood could not be erased in this hotel or his stubborn heart. Some people said Theo became a preacher desperate to calm his tormented soul. How ironic it was that while Lucetta's spirit was trapped in the wild place she loathed, her widower, who loved it so, would abandon it. He tried living in the Animas Valley north of Durango for a while. Nothing helped. He died alone and grief-stricken somewhere in Arizona. In time, there was no one left at Needleton who had known or heard of Lucette. After the hotel and store closed, people lingered there only long enough to pick up and send mail. Oh my goodness, we're almost there to the final countdown. Finally, the day came when there were so few letters that it wasn't worth the time or money to maintain the post office. The empty building... Oh, hold on one second. Let me mute this. Where is it? The empty building, where'd it go? The empty buildings fell into ruin. By then, Lucette would have been an old woman if she had lived. The river dealt a final blow to the settlement, sweeping far out of its banks to obliterate every sign that people ever lived or died in Needleton. It took the logs and foundation stones and trees that sheltered them, the ground on which they were planted, even the grave markers are gone. Could the woman who wanted so desperately to leave be there still? Or did she go off on a tidal wave? Tidal wave from the river. Thank you guys so much for listening to my shenanigans tonight. Thank you for tuning in to We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, Spreaker, Twitter, Periscope, iHeartRadio, or wherever else beyond the Omniverse you're listening tonight. I had a wonderful time this evening, and I can't wait to do it again next weekend when we have Lost Souls Paranormal on. You guys don't forget, we are all in this together. Together we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media. Because without you, there is no us. Make sure you guys tune in on Mondays. We got Sleepy Dave Davenport with Coffee and a Chat. And then on Fridays, we got 1028 Live with Mr. Doc Skinner. We also have our awesome sponsors, Mr. Jem Morris, Kevin McDougall, Del Elson, Mia Savage, and our music host, Roy Washington. Night Night, Love and Light. You guys take care of my yous.